Chapter 1816. Neo Hansan and Hua arrived. Many experts on planet immortality were shocked and seething with excitement. However, that was all. After all, many big shots had descended on planet immortality over the past 200 years. Therefore, they did not pay too much attention to it. Hua and Johan-san sensed the aura of the restaurant. He headed straight for the restaurant. When they landed outside the restaurant, many immortals looked at them. These immortals didn't recognize Hua and Johan-san, but their powerful auras put them on high alert. The two of them walked straight into the restaurant. However, Wu Shuang stopped him. "We want to see owner Bu," Hua said. After a few hundred years, she had grown into a slender and elegant woman. She had grown even more mature and beautiful. Her every frown and smile seemed to radiate beauty. This was the charming aura emitted by the seven-colored sky devouring python, which had reached the great success stage. Wu Shuang's eyes were cold and unmoved. Neo Hansan came up to Wu Shuang and said with a smile, "Little brother, you look like a new waiter hired by owner Bu, right? Let us in. We are old acquaintances of owner Bu. Line up." Wu Shuang said lightly. He glanced at the two of them. Neo Hansan was stunned. This brother was so stubborn. The surrounding immortals looked like they were watching a good show. Hua frowned and looked into the restaurant. But before she could open her mouth to call out, Bu Fang's indifferent voice came from within. "Wu Shuang, let them in." Wu Shuang was stunned. Then he nodded. He turned his body slightly and said, "Please." Neo Hansan narrowed his eyes, took out a spirit fruit, and threw it to Wu Shuang. "Little brother, that's right. Here, I'll give you a spirit fruit." Neo Hansan said with a smile. Wu Shuang took it with a cold face. The rich spiritual energy in the fruit made his pupils constrict. Neo Hansan grinned. This was his hybrid spirit fruit, and it was definitely an extraordinary fruit. He wouldn't even give it to ordinary people. The moment he stepped into the restaurant, the familiar atmosphere made Neo Hansan take a deep breath in comfort. Yang Jin glanced at them indifferently and did not say anything. Bu Fang sat on a cushion under a tree, holding a cup of hot tea in his hands as he watched Neo Hansan and Hua enter the restaurant. The moment Neo Hansan saw Bu Fang, he was stunned. What happened? How did the once high-spirited Bu Fang become so old and frail? With Bu Fang's strength, how could he become so old? Was he, Neo Hansan, hallucinating? "Owner Bu," Neo Hansan said anxiously, but Bu Fang waved his hand and interrupted him. Hua pursed his lips, a complicated look in his eyes. He couldn't believe that Bu Fang had become like this. There was no aura of spiritual energy in him. He had become immortal. That powerful man had actually been reduced to such a state. Neo Hansan fell silent. Ever since the farmland was separated from Bu Fang and he wandered in the universe, he knew that something bad must have happened to Bu Fang. He didn't expect that the once powerful owner Bu would become immortal. Moreover, judging from owner Bu's aura, he seemed to be at the end of his rope. Damn it! Neo Hansan began to rummage through his dimensional bag. He took out one spirit fruit after another and threw them away. He was a little disappointed. He found that the spirit fruits he had hybridized could do nothing about Bu Fang's current situation. "There's no need to look. This is the path I chose," Bu Fang said. Neo Hansan stopped what he was doing. Neo Hansan immediately flew to Bu Fang's side and cried for his parents. "Owner Bu, if you die of old age, how can I live? I'm so sad. No one will talk to me about hybridization in the future. It's so hard." Bu Fang, all right, get up." Bu Fang glanced at Neo Hansan. The latter got up with tears and snot on his face. Hua walked over and looked at Bu Fang with a complicated gaze. "You're out of seclusion. You came just in time. I have something for you to bring out," Bu Fang said. Hua was stunned. "I thought I wouldn't be able to wait for you." Bu Fang's lips twitched and the wrinkles on his face trembled. He shook his head. "Why are you like this? You can stand at the top of the universe." Hua said, "Aren't I also standing at the top of the universe now?" Bu Fang gave Flowery a playful look, causing the latter to be slightly taken aback. He walked his own path, and in the end he walked out his own world. Perhaps he was already above the universe. It was a mysterious feeling. "Man is small, but also great," Bu Fang said lightly. Wait for me. Bufong turned and went into the kitchen. Everyone was stunned. Is Bufong going to cook? Wu Shuang sighed. This was the first time he had seen Bufong like this. Was that moment really coming? Wu Shuang's heart tightened. He found it hard to accept. He had learned about Bufong's deeds from many immortals. The latter was a real big shot in the universe. He was a terrifying existence who could destroy planet immortality with a single thought. But now, he was like an old man, as if he was handing over his funeral affairs. For some reason, he felt a little sad. The sound of cooking came from the kitchen. It was not loud, but it made many people's hearts heavier. The aroma of food spread out and lingered in the air. Hua sat in a chair and waited quietly. Niu Hansan lay on the table, tears streaming down his face. He had finished eating and did not plan to leave. He felt that something big was going to happen today, so he decided to wait. The immortals around him were silent, staring at the restaurant. It seemed that something extraordinary was about to happen. Wu Shuang sat cross-legged with his sword on his back, his eyes red. Sizzle. The restaurant was very quiet. There was only the sound of Bufong cooking and Niu Hansan sobbing. At this moment, Hua wanted to slap Niu Hansan. Can't you be serious? Time ticked by. Finally, the sound of cooking in the kitchen stopped, and it became quiet. Everyone held their breaths. In the kitchen, Bufong's back was stooped. He walked slowly out of the kitchen, step by step. In his hand was a rosewood lunchbox. He came to the restaurant. He placed the lunchbox on the table. Bufong took a deep breath. Everyone's eyes fell on the lunchbox, and their eyes froze. The looks in Hua and Niu Hansan's eyes were very complicated. Bufong opened the lunchbox. Then, he took out one steaming dish after another. This is dragon blood rice. Bring it to Void City for you. She should be able to eat it on the day she comes out of seclusion. Bufong brought out the sparkling dragon blood rice. Although he had lost his cultivation base, he could still cook spiritual energy dishes with his cooking skills. Hua nodded. Bufong continued. This is sweet and sour ribs. Help me give it to the Lord Go, who oversees the chaos space. He should have lost a lot of weight after not having sweet and sour ribs for a long time. The corners of Bufong's mouth lifted slightly. There's also Ha's spicy strips. It must be hard for him to live without them. Here's a meatball, an ordinary meatball. I don't think Little Who will mind. Xiaopi, help me give this jar of wine to him. Bufong brought out one dish after another. Hua's eyes grew more and more stunned. These were all familiar dishes, but why did Bufong bring them out at this moment? I don't want them. Give them to them yourself. Hua frowned, shook his head, and refused. Bufong gave Hua a look. Stop it. These words made Xiao Hua's body stiffen. After a long time, he sighed. His hand shook. A light flashed, and all the dishes were taken away. Remember, if they don't have enough to eat, I'll come to you again, Hua said to Bufong seriously as he walked out of the restaurant. The corners of Bufong's mouth lifted slightly, and he nodded. Niu Hansan sniffled. Owner Bu, where's this old cow? Niu Hansan said. Bufong glanced at Niu Hansan. He raised his hand. He waved at 80, who was lying listlessly on Xiao Bai's head. 80's eyes lit up. With a leap, it appeared beside Bufong. Bufong rubbed 80's head. Help me take care of 80. He's the best ingredient in the world. 80's body stiffened, and it's chicken but twisted. He's not the best ingredient. He's just a chicken. Niu Hansan squeezed 80's neck and kept nodding. This old cow will be the most powerful father of hybrids in the world. Leave 80 to me. Don't worry. Niu Hansan made a solemn vow. Bufong raised his eyebrows. He hesitated. Why did he feel uncertain about what Niu Hansan said? However, Bufong did not say anything in the end. Bufong turned his head and looked at Wu Shuang in the distance. Wu Shuang walked over. Elder Bu, it's time for you to go out and explore the world. You don't have to guard me anymore. The world is big, and your sword can be stronger. Bufong said, as long as you stick to the sword path in your heart, sooner or later, you will reach the height I once reached. Wu Shuang's eyes reddened slightly. He nodded solemnly. All right. In the distance, Yang Jian let out a sigh. He could see that Bufong's aura of life began to dissipate like running water. After all, Bufang was once a chaotic saint. He had transcended the primitive universe and was no longer bound by this universe. Therefore, his aura of life had dissipated, and he did not enter the transmigration. Bufang raised his head. His eyes were indifferent. From today on, the restaurant will be closed. Everyone disperse, Bufang said. As soon as his voice rang out, everyone's heart trembled. In the distance, the rusty whitey stood up with its iron skin flipped over. There seemed to be a flash of light in his mechanical eyes. Then, under everyone's incredulous gaze, a rumble rang out. Bufang and Xiao Bai also disappeared. Buzz, 10,000 flowers bloom with a single thought. Bufang's faint sigh lingered in the restaurant. On that sturdy little tree, beautiful flowers suddenly bloomed one after another. In the restaurant, all of a sudden, the restaurant was filled with dazzling light. The flowers spread and covered everything. Holy flowers bloomed under everyone's feet. With the restaurant as the center, they spread in all directions. Chapter 18:17. One flower, two flowers, 10,000 flowers bloomed with a single thought. With the restaurant as the center, they spread out in all directions of the city. The jade-green vines spread out and intertwined, forming flower buds. The flower buds vibrated quietly and bloomed quietly. A fragrance wafted through the air, looking extremely beautiful. In an instant, the flowers spread across the entire city. The immortals fell silent. Nyohan San held 80 in his arms, his eyes filled with tears. Honorbu, how could such an awesome man become like this? Hua carried the sandalwood lunchbox, his eyes flickering slightly. Yang Jian sighed and stood up. His body suddenly changed. He put on his armor and held his three-pointed, double-edged saber. The celestial hound's body emanated black smoke as it followed behind him. It's time to go back, Yang Jian said. The next moment, he turned into a stream of light, stepped on an auspicious cloud, and soared into the sky. The immortals were shocked. The mortals were even more shocked. They had never seen such a scene before. Even the emperor and his ministers in the palace were alarmed, and a look of disbelief appeared on their faces. The mortals knelt and kept kowtowing, praying for peace. One day, they saw 100 flowers bloom. This auspicious sign caused them to be extremely excited. They believed that if they prayed now, their wish would come true. Wu Shuang did not leave. He leaned against the wall of the restaurant, slowly slid down, and sat on the ground. He sighed. He raised his hand and covered his face. He had thrown the sword to the ground. He was a little confused now. Bufang asked him to leave the restaurant and travel the world. Perhaps, after traveling, his strength could achieve a breakthrough. But Wu Shuang did not. He stayed in the restaurant and sat quietly. Nyohan San held 80 in his arms and did not leave. Like Wu Shuang, he also stayed in the restaurant. The old bull still believed that Honorbu would come back. Nyohan San clearly remembered that he was captured by Bufang and brought into the heaven and earth farmland. He thought he was going to die. However, it was good that he was dead. His days in the ruined prison were not good. However, in the heaven and earth farmland, he didn't expect that his days would get better and better. He even realized the value of his life and was filled with positive thoughts about his future. He learned how to hybridize and displayed his usefulness, becoming the father of hybridization in the other world. He still remembered that he and Bufang were discussing how to make perishing pots, how to infuse the will of the great path into ingredients. When he thought about it, it felt like a lifetime had passed. Little Eighth was also listless and had no appetite to eat. Hua left. She had to do what she had to do. She had promised Bufang, so she naturally had to fulfill it. Nyohan San did not go with her. Hua didn't insist. Thus, she turned into a giant python and streaked across the sky. She held the lunchbox in her mouth, and there seemed to be a strange energy circulating within the lunchbox. In fact, the food in the lunchbox was only made from ordinary ingredients. Chaotic universe. Hangapass. The four experts sitting cross-legged on Hangapass slowly opened their eyes. There was a complicated look in Tongtian's eyes. He raised his hand. Sword light swirled around him. With his hands clasped behind his back, he stood on the city wall, and looked at a dish hovering in the distant sky. It was like the most stunning dish in the world, blooming with supreme brilliance. It attracted everyone's attention. With just a glance, it made people unable to restrain their appetites. They couldn't wait to taste it. However, no one dared to try it. It was a simple dish, but it contained an incomparably terrifying existence. All kinds of arrays had been set up around it. These were the top arrays of the chaotic universe, and each of them possessed terrible lethality. They were all there to prevent the terrifying existence suppressed by the dish from coming out. 500 years. It's gone in a flash. Tong Tian heaved a sigh. He didn't expect 500 years to pass so quickly. The arrays Bufong had set up could only suppress Soul God for 1,000 years, and now half of the time had passed. It was as if an hourglass was constantly flowing. All that was flowing was time. Tong Tian's eyes were deep. He took a step forward. In the next moment, his figure suddenly disappeared from this world. A sword light streaked across the boundless universe. It shot toward planet Immortality. On planet Immortality, Tong Tian, dressed in a Taoist robe and carrying the Qingping sword on his back, walked slowly. In the distance was a restaurant. Flowers were blooming around the restaurant. Tong Tian's pupils constricted. Those flowers were the condensation of will, and they contained energy that made his heart palpitate. He walked between the flowers and came to the restaurant. 2 people and a chicken were sitting in front of the door. Neo Hansen's face was covered with snot and tears, and he cried bitterly. Tong Tian glanced at him indifferently. Then his eyes fell on Wu Shuang. Tong Tian's pupils constricted. He looked at Wu Shuang as if he was looking at a sharp sword that was about to be unsheathed. A genius of the sword path had a far better understanding of sword intent than a so-called sword immortal. If he was given enough time to grow, he could even reach the level of a chaotic saint. That was rare. Wu Shuang glanced at Tong Tian. There was sadness in his eyes. Tong Tian did not say anything. He just shook his head. Although he wanted to take Wu Shuang as his disciple, he saw a trace of despair in Wu Shuang's eyes. He knew that if he proposed to take Wu Shuang as his disciple, he would definitely be rejected. Sect leader Tong Tian's divine sense instantly covered the entire planet Immortality. After a long time, he sighed. I'm too late after all. Did he really become a decaying mortal and disappear from this world? Failed in seeking the Tao? Has he come to the end of his life? Tong Tian's eyes were complicated. He took a step forward. In an instant, he turned into a sword and shot into the sky. On planet Immortality, the deep mountains were covered with snow. On a mountain road that was covered with a thick layer of snow, 2 figures were walking with difficulty. Bufong walked step by step with his back hunched, leaving footprints in the snow. However, these footprints were soon covered by the wind and snow and disappeared. Xiaobai followed closely behind him. In the distance, a small cottage appeared. Xiaobai's mechanical eyes flashed. Bufong came to the front of the wooden cottage, gently pushed it open, and shook off the crisp snow. It was a familiar place. Bufong was back here. He pushed the door open and took out a bamboo chair. Unfortunately, the chair was rotten, and the cottage was about to collapse. The decaying wooden cottage was like Bufong, which was about to decay. Instead of sitting on the chair, Bufong sat on the stairs in front of the cottage. He sat quietly. Xiaobai also sat beside him. The atmosphere was very quiet. There was no sound. The leaves rustled. It was as quiet as a silent game. He had chosen to live in seclusion here and live a simple and unrestrained life. But now, he came back here and sat down again. Xiaobai sat quietly. He was rusty and decayed, similar to Bufong. Bufong's eyes flickered. He lowered his head, and all the sounds became very clear. The sound of insects, the sound of melting snow, the sound of blowing wind, the sound of children playing in a newborn village at the foot of the mountain, the sound of fish swimming in the frozen river in the mountain stream. Bufong suddenly came to his senses. He turned his head quietly and looked at Xiaobai beside him. Xiaobai's body emitted bits of baiguang. Those baiguang were constantly dissipating, dispersing in the air, drifting in the void. Xiaobai's mechanical eyes looked at Bufong. It stretched out its hand and patted Bufong's shoulder. Then, his body began to turn into Baiguang and constantly dissipated. Ring, 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 the sound of wind chimes swaying rang out. Bu Fong was stunned, watching Xiao Bai turn into Baiguang and rush into the sky. It seemed to turn into sand between fingers and quietly slip away. The feeling of loss made him inexplicably uncomfortable. Bu Fong raised his hand. He looked at his fingers. His fingertips were also emitting bits of Baiguang like Xiao Bai. These white light spots were like the teleportation array that the system built for Bu Fong when it first appeared. Bu Fong raised his head and looked at the sky. The white light spots that his body had turned into drifted into the sky. Ring, 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 the sound of wind chimes rang out. There was nothing in front of the decaying wooden hut. Boom, snowflakes flew. The wooden hut roared. The decaying wooden hut fell to the ground and completely turned into ruins. Under the cover of the wind and snow, they became the dust of history. Bu Fong and Xiao Bai, this time, really disappeared. In a mist, Bu Fong opened his eyes. Was he dead? He glanced at his body. His old body was gone. He became slender and thin again, just like when he had just inherited the system. Bu Fong was slightly stunned. He did not want to walk the ruthless path, not because of anything else, but because he was a chef. If he was ruthless, what delicious dishes could he cook? Dishes without emotions were all hooligans. He did not deny that the ruthless path existed because it had its own reason. The primordial heavenly path was the ruthless path. If heaven had feelings, it would also grow old. It was precisely because it was ruthless that it could exist forever. Bu Fong looked around. It was extremely dark. It was a kind of cold darkness, as if the soul was imprisoned and could not break free. Xiao Bai was not there, and there was no acquaintance around. A surging sense of loneliness made Bu Fong feel lonely. Looking back, he had been immortal for 500 years. He had experienced the coldness and warmth of human feelings in the world. The lifespan of a mortal was limited. Because of his physical body, it was not easy for him to live for 500 years. But in 500 years, he had seen through the decay and reincarnation of life. Kinship, friendship, love, brotherhood, master and disciple. He had experienced all kinds of emotions. Of course, these emotions were felt for mortals. For him, it was shocking. Buzz Bu Fong was thinking in a daze. In the boundless darkness, perhaps only these emotions in his memory could bring a little warmth to his body. Suddenly, Bu Fong was stunned and looked at the boundless darkness. Bit by bit, Baiguang gathered together. It transformed into a human figure. That figure was extremely blurry. However, it gave Bu Fong an extremely familiar feeling. That familiarity went deep into his bones and spread into his soul. His face was blurry and he could not see clearly. His slender figure and fluttering black hair. He was wearing a simple white robe. He condensed from white light spots and floated in front of Bu Fong. Bu Fong was stunned. He stared at that figure. The blurry figure slowly floated. After a while, it floated in front of Bu Fong. The blurry face moved closer and almost touched Bu Fong's face. Bu Fong could even feel that the other party was smiling. "Who are you?" Bu Fong asked expressionlessly. A voice that seemed to be produced by the vibration of the soul resounded in Bu Fong's mind. However, that voice made Bu Fong's body suddenly tense. "Host of hundreds of generations. You are finally here. After hundreds of generations, you are the only one who insisted on coming here." "Who am I?" "I am here to help you take the last step." "God." Chapter 1818. God. Bu Fong paused. The one who could be called a god in front of him should be the legendary god of cooking. The creator of the system, the one who had helped Bu Fong embark on the path of the god of cooking. The one who stood high above the masses and seemed to control everything. The god of cooking set, the god of cooking's menu, the god of cooking's system. From the beginning, Bu Fong's everything was related to this god of cooking. In the beginning, Bu Fong had worked hard to become the god of cooking. However, at some point, Bu Fong began to walk his own path. The so-called path of the god of cooking in his heart was no longer the god of cooking that had been hanging over his head, but the path he wanted to walk now. even if the path was full of thorns and bumps. Yes, the God who will help you take the last step. The blurry figure seemed to be laughing. It made Bufang very uncomfortable. Bufang did not know why he was here. Where is this place? The transmigration space? But it should not be. Bufang had long jumped out of the shackles of heaven and earth and was no longer in the transmigration. The figure's white robe fluttered, although his face could not be seen. However, Bufang was very calm. Perhaps his 500 years of mortal experience had made it difficult for his state of mind to fluctuate. You don't seem very surprised, the vague figure said. There was some doubt in his words. Why should I be surprised? I knew you would come sooner or later, Bufang said lightly. He and the vague figure floated in the air, facing each other. Bufang's black hair fluttered as if he was at the bottom of a bottomless pool. The host of 500 generations. You're the only one who can come this far. Aren't you proud? The vague figure said. With my help, you will soon touch the realm of the real god of cooking. You will become a supreme existence. The vague figure smiled. His voice was very soft. It made people feel like they were bathing in a spring breeze. Bufang didn't say anything and just looked at the figure indifferently. In fact, there were a few hosts who could have reached this step before, but they all refused. The blurry figure said with some regret. He raised his hand as if to caress Bufang's face. However, when his hand touched Bufang's face, it turned into white spots of light and dispersed. The blurry figure did not seem to mind. Now, are you ready? Bufang shook his head. He looked at the figure indifferently. Actually, if possible, I don't want to go this far. Bufang shook his head. The blurry figure was slightly taken aback. Why? Why? The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly, revealing a hint of mockery. He raised his hand and pointed at the pitch-black space around him. What do you think? The blurry man burst into laughter. Don't worry. After accepting everything I give you, you will be able to return and stand at the highest point in the world, overlooking all living things. You will rule the world. The blurry figure raised his arms and said domineeringly, I'm just a chef. How can I rule the world? Bufang shook his head and said indifferently. The blurry figure was speechless. If you continue like this, there's no way we can continue this conversation. Bufang was very calm. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked around. Where's Xiaobai? Can he still return? Bufang asked. Xiaobai? You mean the chef puppet? That's just a dead thing. He has protected you to this level, which means he has completed his mission. He can be considered to have completed his mission and can disappear in peace. Everything in the world, everyone and everything has their own reason and meaning of existence, the blurry figure said. There was a hint of indifference in the blurry figure's words. Bufang froze in midair at this kind of indifference. Bufang stared at the blurry figure. What are you talking about? Bufang said. Xiaobai is my friend. Why does he have to disappear? Bufang's voice was filled with violent emotions. Your emotions are too strong. You shouldn't be like this. Soon, you will be a supreme existence. You will look down on all living things in the world. You have to look at them with the mentality of all living beings. You should be like an ancient well without ripples. You should not carry any emotions. You don't need to worry about anything. The blurry figure said. All right, don't say those useless words. Are you ready to accept the real inheritance? As long as you accept it, you will be the supreme existence in the world, the blurry figure said patiently. Bufang frowned and stared at the blurry figure. God of cooking? Is this guy really the god of cooking? I don't accept it. Bufang shook his head and refused the temptation of the guy in front of him. In other words, the current Bufang was completely indifferent to this temptation. Unless his heart accepted it, he would not be swayed at all. You don't accept it? Why don't you accept it? You started out as a nobody, and everything you've been pursuing is to become the god of cooking. Now this opportunity is right in front of you. Why don't you cherish it? The blurry figure said calmly. The latter's words seemed to become colder and colder. This is not the path I chose. Bufang said. You're only one step away from what you yearn for. What are you hesitating for? What are you wavering about? The god of cooking? or those insignificant people? The blurry figure said, his white robe fluttering faster and faster. You should choose me. I'm the one who has supported you all the way to this point. I'm your future. The blurry figure almost roared. That voice made Bufong's eyes slightly shrink. After a long time, the dark space suddenly quieted down. Bufong looked at the blurry figure. Are you done? The blurry figure was taken aback. What the hell are you talking about? Bufong shook his head, a little disappointed. You're not the god of cooking. If you are, how could you say such a thing? Bufong said lightly. The blurry figure hovered in the darkness. White spots of light kept hovering. How could I not be the god of cooking? I know everything about you, and I've seen everything about you. The blurry figure said. He raised his hand. Instantly, drops of divine power, liquid drops, emerged in his palm. Bufong was very familiar with those golden divine power liquid drops. See this? I once gave you this divine power liquid drop, the blurry figure said. The humanoid figure said. His tone seemed to be a little hurried. Bufong's eyes became more and more playful. The wind was blowing fiercely. The hasty, blurry figure quickly regained his composure. I said, I refuse. Bufong's face was expressionless. His words were resolute and decisive. Finally, the blurry silhouette floated up. A burst of laughter rang out in the dark space. It was very loud. Soon, the dark space began to shake. Rumble, the sound of something collapsing rang out. The darkness began to disappear, and a white light emerged in front of Bufong. The white light grew brighter and brighter, and eventually it completely blinded his eyes. Congratulations. You've resisted the temptation. There are no shortcuts in this world, even if you're only one step away from the peak. From the moment you set foot on the path of the god of cooking, you're destined to be extraordinary. This is the last test I'll give you. I wish you good luck. The blurry figure disappeared. Only the rumbling of heaven and earth was left. The next moment, Bufong gradually became familiar with the light. It was very soft. In front of him appeared a cabin in the woods. The wind was blowing gently, very soft, and very comfortable. Bufong clasped his hands behind his back and looked around. Slowly, he walked toward the cabin. He pushed the door open. Inside the cabin, a strong aroma wafted out. On the table was a dish that had been stripped of its ostentatiousness, emitting countless rays of golden light. The radiance was dazzling and eye-catching. Bufong sat in front of the table. Looking at the dish, he took a deep breath. The aroma went into his mouth and nose, making Bufong feel as if his whole body had been baptized. It was a simple dish, but in its simplicity, there was something extraordinary. The light flowing over the dish made Bufong take a deep breath. With Bufong's eyesight, he could tell at a glance that the quality of these ingredients was absolutely extraordinary. Each of them was the essence of heaven and earth, the top ingredient. A dish cooked with such ingredients, stripped of its ostentatiousness, contained its essence, which was extremely terrifying. Was this the god of cooking's last test? Bufong took a deep breath. Then, he sat in front of the dining table. He turned his head and looked around the room. There was only a dining table and a stove in the room. It was very simple. Bufong seemed to think of something. The corner of his mouth twitched. He withdrew his gaze and rested it on the dish in front of him. He raised his hand and grabbed the chopsticks. The chopsticks fell and picked up the delicacy in the dish. When Bufong took a sniff of the ostentatious dish, he felt as if his soul had been sublimated. He slowly put the dish into his mouth. He chewed it. Bufong's pupils constricted slightly. So delicious, Bufong's eyes flickered. He felt a little incredulous. Did such a delicacy really exist in the world? Bufong felt as if he was galloping in the universe at this moment. He was shuttling between countless planets, feeling the baptism of the purest aura of heaven and earth. At this moment, he felt a sense of pride, as if he was looking down on all the other mountains. A god of cooking dish. Bufong was sure that this dish must have been cooked by the god of cooking. After eating this dish, he felt that his aura began to soar, rising rapidly from the realm of a mortal. His aura rumbled. Soon, he broke through the level of a saint of the great path. With this one thought, it was as if he had thrown everything to the back of his mind. Bufong closed his eyes. He let out a long breath. He raised his hand and felt the surging magic power in his body. He shook his head. This is the first time I've eaten a god of cooking dish. It's really incredible. This was not a pseudo-god of cooking dish, but a real god of cooking dish. It was even more powerful than the mountain and river map that Bufong used to suppress Soul God. Bufong's eyes were filled with complicated emotions. Such a dish, but I don't feel any emotional fluctuation. God of cooking, is this the path you chose? Bufong shook his head and sighed regretfully. No. Bufong's regretful expression suddenly froze, and he slowly opened his eyes. He picked up another dish with his chopsticks and stuffed it into his mouth. The room became very quiet. There was only the rustling of the wind outside the hut in the forest. Bufong closed his eyes. This time, it tasted completely different. He closed his eyes. A beautiful figure seemed to emerge in his mind. Her voice and smile appeared. Although he did not know her, he could feel the joy in her smile. This dish was not only ruthless, it was also the path of emotion. Bufong opened his eyes, and a tear fell from the corner of his eye. However, this path of emotion was bitter. There was a trace of emotion in its ruthlessness. Was this the god of cooking's path? Bufong put down his chopsticks. He seemed to hear a low moan. It was as if someone was whispering something into his ear. She was telling a story in a low voice. The story made Bufong's eyes grow sadder and sadder. After a long time, Bufong sighed. There was a trace of emotion in the path of ruthlessness. This was what the god of cooking wanted to express, and what he wanted to express was obvious. This path would not work, because the god of cooking was walking toward death on this path. The god of cooking's final test was obvious. He asked Bufong to cook a dish, and this dish it had to surpass the god of cooking. Otherwise, Bufong would fail the test, and the price of failure was obliteration. Whether it was the system or the god of cooking, they had set the tone from the beginning. Bufong did not flinch, nor was he afraid. He stood up. With his hands clasped behind his back, he walked step by step toward the kitchen of the hut in the forest. Swish pulling out the kitchen knife, the corners of Bufong's mouth lifted slightly. Chapter 1819. The hut in the forest looked shabby, but since it was the place where the god of cooking prepared for Bufong's final test, many things were extraordinary. Bufong held the kitchen knife in his hand, and he seemed to be able to feel the extremely terrifying fluctuations contained within it. It was much more powerful than the dragon bone kitchen knife in its full form. The kitchen knife, the wok, the stove, everything was of very high quality, like a top divine artifact in the universe. The god of cooking was also very concerned about this final test. He hoped that Bufong could cook a top delicacy, because only then could he be truly qualified to inherit the god of cooking's inheritance. Therefore, the ingredients and cooking utensils the god of cooking prepared for Bufong were all the best in the world. Holding the kitchen knife, Bufong's face gradually became expressionless. His eyes were somewhat deep, as if he was thinking about something. After a long time, Bufong shook his head and put down the kitchen knife. He didn't use the cooking utensils the god of cooking prepared for him. He looked at the ingredients piled up in the distance, which exuded a round aura. They were all top ingredients in the universe. They were not weaker than great soul overlords. Using the best ingredients and cooking utensils to cook the best delicacies, the corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. He took a step back. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, he didn't start cooking. Instead, he fell in a deep thought. The god of cooking's dishes were a mixture of the ruthless path and the emotional path, with the ruthless path taking up more of it. Perhaps it was because of this that the god of cooking began to pursue a successor. The god of cooking had taken the wrong path, and he might have perished in the universe. That was why he was looking for 100 hosts. Bufong pondered for a long time. He looked indifferently at everything in front of him. Then, the gorgeous cooking utensils and ingredients began to change. The originally flashy and surging top-grade ingredients became very ordinary. The originally surging top-grade ingredients also became very mediocre, just like the ordinary cooking utensils used by the villagers in the countryside. From the world's top cooking utensils and ingredients, they became the most common mortal ingredients and cooking utensils in the world. Perhaps even the god of cooking did not understand what Bu Fong wanted to do at this moment. Bu Fong stood up, holding the ordinary kitchen knife in his hand. He took his time and started cooking, using these simple ingredients to cook. A fresh cabbage was washed clean by Bu Fong. He slowly peeled the cabbage, as if pouring all his emotions into it. He cracked the egg into the bowl and slowly cracked the egg with his chopsticks. He watched as the egg white and the egg yolk mixed together. The reddened pork was placed on the chopping board. Bu Fong did not use his exquisite knife skills. Instead, he used his hands, which were covered with water droplets, to hold the pork down and slice by slice. Slowly cut it into pieces. Everything was done in an unhurried manner. Bu Fong was not as impatient as he used to be when cooking. It was this kind of ordinary knife skills that could bring out the taste of the ingredients to the extreme. This was a kind of knife skill that poured emotion into it. As the knife sliced down, the concern for the ingredients spread out. Bam! The shining white flour was poured out, and the flying dust drifted, making Bu Fong's hands white. Bu Fong's hands were clear, slender, and white. He piled the flour into a small bag. He poked a small hole in the middle of the flour. When a shining white water was poured into the hole, the flour immediately collapsed and began to float. The water surged, breaking the flour like water bursting a dam. It kept flowing, but halfway through, it was all absorbed by the flour, rolling into a ball of flour. Bu Fong's hands fell. Those water balls were instantly crushed, and the flour was kneaded together. Not too fast or too slow, he kneaded rhythmically. He did not use the Tai Chi kneading method. He did not use the power of the law or the great path. Bu Fong kneaded the dough at a leisurely pace. It was as if he was rubbing and bathing his child. In the sky, there seemed to be a pair of invisible eyes watching Bu Fong. Perhaps it was because he was amazed by Bu Fong's cooking method. He had top-grade ingredients and powerful cooking utensils, but he did not use them. He was cooking in the most ordinary way. Did Bu Fong think that cooking in an ordinary way could be compared to cooking with the best ingredients and cooking utensils? Bu Fong was unmoved. His eyes were full of emotions. The flour was gradually kneaded into a ball. As he pressed his hand down slightly, the porcelain basin made a soft noise. It was a real god of cooking dish. Bu Fong used to think that with top-grade ingredients and cooking utensils, he could cook the best delicacies. But that time, he was wrong. Perhaps it was because he was not strong enough. With Xiaopi's help, he could only cook a pseudo-god of cooking dish. The gap between them was like a universe light years, and it could not be bridged. Bu Fong had spent 500 years thinking and chasing after that one-step gap, but he still could not surpass it by even a little bit. Bu Fong knew that kind of despair very well. And when he ate the god of cooking's dish, it was a dish cooked with top-grade ingredients and top-grade cooking utensils. It was a god of cooking dish cooked with the best of the right time, place, and people. There was no hypocrisy. However, it did not amaze Bu Fong. It even made him feel a little lost. Could it be that a real god of cooking dish could only reach this level? Bu Fong began to question it. He began to reflect. He felt that maybe his method was wrong. Putting aside the vanity, he cooked with the most ordinary ingredients and the simplest cooking utensils. He kneaded the dough into small balls. Using a rolling pin, he carefully rolled the small balls into pieces of dough wrapper. On the other side, in an ordinary clay basin, Bu Fong mixed all kinds of ingredients together and stirred them. The ingredients were mixed together. It was a kind of miraculous chemical reaction which amazed people. Bu Fong was intoxicated. Simplicity was the real deal. This might be the god of cooking dish that Bu Fong was pursuing. He quietly scooped out a spoonful of stuffing and stuffed it into the dough. Bu Fong carefully wrapped the dough, layer by layer. He was very serious. While wrapping the dumplings, Bu Fong's eyes wandered. In his chaotic eyes, 500 years of time appeared in front of him bit by bit. For Bu Fong, 500 years was the time he had spent most of his life. Even on Earth, in the hidden dragon continent, in the Heaven Chief realm, in the chaotic universe, the time spent was not as long as 500 years. For Bu Fong, these 500 years were kind of mental stability. Sometimes he missed his old friends, and sometimes he missed the positive mood and mentality when he first stepped into cooking. At that time, he was small and fearless. But it was this kind of fearlessness that made him feel a little amused. There were more and more dumplings on the stove, and soon they were piled up. Bu Fong stopped. There was no more dumpling skin, and the stuffing was finished. However, he felt that only a moment had passed. Bu Fong raised his hand and rubbed his nose. A pinkish-white spot appeared on his nose. After wrapping the dumplings, he spread the white gauze underneath and put the dumplings into it one by one. Bu Fong covered it with a steamer. Behind the stove, there was a large pile of firewood that had just been burned. It was like the firewood that Bu Fong burned alone in the deep mountains. He put the firewood into the stove. He lit the fire. Boom! The fire suddenly rose to the sky. It was a simple fire. It was not flashy, and it did not spread any energy. The fire was burning. He blew into the stove, and black smoke spread, choking Bu Fong and making him cough a few times. The fire was also lit. There were 2 pots on the stove, both ordinary pots. One was steaming dumplings, and the other was cooking other food. Sizzle! The oil was poured into the pot and began to splash. Bu Fong poured the processed ingredients into the pot. Sizzle! Sizzle! White steam rose. It was the steam produced by the explosion of the oil. He held an ordinary ladle and began to stir-fry. The ingredients began to turn golden, and the fragrance flowed out like gurgling water. He shook the pot and stir-fried the ingredients in the pot. Then he scooped out the steaming dish. The rich fragrance refreshed one's mind. Bu Fong took a deep breath. He felt that his heart was about to melt. He had been cooking for so many years, and this was the first time that a dish made him so intoxicated. Swish! He put strips of noodles into the pot. The noodles began to soften, rolling in the boiling water. The strips of noodles were very thin. This kind of noodles was the dragon whisker noodles that Bu Fong used to cook. Dragon whisker noodles were also called longevity noodles. Bu Fong felt an inexplicable desire to cook them at this moment. In a blue and white porcelain bowl, Bu Fong poured the sauce, vinegar, soy sauce, chopped green onions, and other seasonings into it. When the dragon whisker noodles were boiling, he scooped out the boiling dragon whisker noodles from the pot and put them into the bowl. Bu Fong's eyes were a little complicated. He seemed to remember when he was a child, the dragon whisker noodles his parents cooked for him on his birthday. There was no birthday cake, only a bowl of dragon whisker noodles. It was a simple bowl of noodles, but it contained his parents' care for him and their wish for him to grow up healthily. He exhaled. Bu Fong's hand was slightly trembling as he scooped up the noodles. Gulp! Gulp! The dumplings in the steamer were cooked. Bu Fong took the steamer out of the pot. He placed it on the stove. White steam kept rising from the steamer. Bu Fong opened the lid of the steamer. White steam rolled out like a dragon. White and tender dumplings, emitting steam, were placed in the steamer. Bu Fong picked up the dumplings one by one and arranged them like a blooming flower. In the center of the flower was the sauce he had prepared. In this way, his dishes were cooked. A bowl of steamed dumplings, a bowl of longevity noodles, a fried egg, and a small stir-fried meat. For dishes, simple and easy. Bu Fong took out a blue and white porcelain bowl and scooped up a bowl of sparkling, fragrant white rice. At this point, his dishes were completely cooked. There were no gorgeous ingredients, no earth-shattering cooking utensils. It was a simple and ordinary dish, but it contained Bu Fong's 500 years of experience and emotions. It was ordinary, but extraordinary. This was the choice Bu Fong made in the last test of the god of cooking. In the cabin in the woods, Bu Fong took out the dishes, placing them on the table. On the table were the dishes cooked by the god of cooking, shining brilliantly and dazzlingly. When Bu Fong placed the dishes on the table, the radiant dishes suddenly dimmed. My cooking is over. Please have a taste. Bu Fong placed the rice on the table, setting up a spoon and chopsticks. His voice lingered in the cabin, so confident and loud. The last test, a plate of side dishes, a plate of steamed dumplings, a bowl of dragon whisker noodles, and a fried egg. A bowl of white rice. That was all. Chapter 1820. It was a simple table of dishes. They were ordinary, but there was something extraordinary about them. They could actually suppress the god of cooking's dishes on the table, and they didn't look dim at all. That was a god of cooking's dish, cooked with the world's top ingredients and the most precious kitchen utensils. Compared to ordinary dishes, it was like heaven and earth. Bu Fong raised his hand and made a gesture of invitation. Then, in the void, specks of white light began to rapidly gather. Soon, a human figure was formed. The figure landed on the table and sat on a chair. The figure was very vague, exactly the same as the one Bu Fong had seen in the dark. It was the god of cooking. The god of cooking didn't speak. He was only in charge of the assessment this time, so he didn't say anything. Bu Fong also pulled out a chair, sat down, and watched indifferently. He didn't care about this assessment that concerned life and death. He wasn't even nervous at all. There was only calmness in his heart. It was a wonderful feeling. After all, this was the last round of assessment. But he was calmer than the first assessment. Perhaps this was the transformation of his mentality. The god of cooking picked up his chopsticks. His head was foggy, and his face couldn't be seen clearly. His chopsticks fell and picked up a steamed dumpling. The steamed dumpling emitted steam, and the skin of the dumpling was crystal clear. Under the light, the dumpling filling was reflected. It was a very ordinary dumpling. From the outside, there was nothing special about it. The god of cooking opened his mouth and took a bite of the dumpling. As he bit down, the heat slid out like silk and spread into the air. The dumpling filling tasted delicious. The fresh cabbage was full of water, and the meat filling was also chewy. But these were not the most important things. After the god of cooking took a bite of the dumpling, his body suddenly froze. After a long time, then he sighed leisurely. The dumpling was dipped in the sauce. When it entered his mouth, it was even more fragrant. A plate of dumplings, 9 dumplings, the god of cooking ate them all one bite at a time. An ordinary dish actually made him unable to control his hand and completely stuffed it into his mouth. This feeling, how many years had it been since he had felt it? After eating the dumplings, the god of cooking's eyes fell on the dragon whisker noodles. On the surface of the dragon whisker noodles, there was a cute fried egg. When he uncovered the omelet, a piping hot aroma immediately gushed out. The soup of the dragon whisker noodles was extremely clear. Chi-Chi, the god of cooking, took a sip of the soup. What entered his mouth was a strange taste. It didn't have any amazing texture, and the ingredients were simple and ordinary. But when they fused together, it gave birth to an indescribable feeling. This kind of feeling made his heart feel like it was melting. Bu Fong sat on the chair and watched quietly. He did not interrupt the god of cooking's taste. After taking a deep sip of the soup, the god of cooking exhaled. How much exhaustion and how much nostalgia was contained in this breath. Bu Fong's expression changed slightly. The god of cooking was also a man with a story. The soft texture of the dragon whisker noodles made the god of cooking nod repeatedly. He buried his head and ate the noodles and eggs quietly. Only the sound of slurping could be heard. Suddenly, Bu Fong was stunned, because he saw drops of golden crystal tears dripping from the god of cooking's misty head. With a splash, it fell into the soup of the dragon whisker noodles, causing circles of ripples to form in the soup. Bu Fong pursed his lips and did not say anything. Perhaps the god of cooking had already felt it. The god of cooking raised his hand and held his forehead. He sighed as he ate the noodles. That posture was helpless and sad. Although he was the god of cooking, a supreme existence, the feeling he gave Bu Fong was that he was a mortal, a simple person. The dragon whisker noodles were also finished. There was no soup left, only a chopped green onion stuck in a bowl. The god of cooking gently put down the bowl. He picked up the white rice. He took a bite of the rice. The round rice grain had a fresh rice fragrance. When it entered his mouth and chewed, it even gave off a sweet taste. He picked up a piece of stir-fried pork, which was stir-fried with thinly and evenly sliced pork. When the piece of meat entered his mouth, the god of cooking's hand holding the chopsticks seemed to tremble. Every dish contained emotions, which were the crystallization of 500 years of Bu Fong's mortal life. All kinds of emotions were integrated into it. Such a dish might be more attractive than a simple delicacy cooked with top-grade ingredients. The rice was finished, and the stir-fried pork was finished. The 4 simple dishes were all eaten up. However, the god of cooking's dish on the table only had a dim light left. It was no longer so dazzling. The god of cooking leaned back in his chair. Bu Fong did not speak, just looked at him quietly. Bu Fong did not know the result of this last test. The god of cooking did not know what he was thinking. The feeling the god of cooking gave Bu Fong was that he was like an ordinary person, full of flesh and blood. The latter looked at the sky. Bu Fong could feel a blurry gaze coming from it. Looking at the sky, there was a story behind that gaze. After a long time, the god of cooking raised his hand and swept it. The god of cooking's dish on the table disappeared. It's really a perfect table of dishes, the god of cooking said. His voice seemed to have become very hoarse at this moment. Dishes with emotions are indeed very attractive, but this path is very difficult to walk. The god of cooking's eyes finally fell on Bu Fong. Bu Fong nodded. If heaven has emotions, it will grow old. If one pursues the path of emotion, he will age with time. After 500 years, I have seen through it. It's like a rule that cannot be broken. The god of cooking stood up and put his hands behind his back. I just want to ask you one last time. Are you really going to walk this path? Bu Fong also stood up and put his hands behind his back. The two of them stood in front of the hut in the forest and looked at the boundless wilderness. I can't be ruthless. There's no way back. There was a long silence. The god of cooking smiled. Congratulations, you've passed the final test. Your dishes are very charming, and the emotions contained in them are moving. In the past, I didn't understand this feeling. I thought that only by being ruthless could I be eternal, but I couldn't be truly ruthless. I provoked the world of mortals and eventually perished in the starry sky. I hope you won't follow in my footsteps. Perhaps you don't need my inheritance anymore. But I have to tell you that the path of emotion is not so easy to walk, so I'll give you a way out. The god of cooking said. Buzz, everything in the hut in the forest began to change. The environment was collapsing. Then everything around them turned as dark as ink. It was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Bu Fong watched in a daze. He knew that everything just now was not real, but that feeling was so real. He was indeed the god of cooking, a supreme existence. Buzz, a spot of light flickered. Bai Guang was dazzling, like a star blooming in the night sky. The next moment, Bai Guang became brighter and brighter, and a holy lotus emerged in front of Bu Fong. This is the senseless lotus. If you want to take a step back, you can eat it. It can make you forget all your emotions. The god of cooking's voice became distant. Then a golden book slowly emerged. Bu Fong recognized it. It was the god of cooking's menu. However, unlike the previous incomplete god of cooking's menu, this one was complete. It exuded the supreme aura of the great path, which shocked Bu Fong so much that his heart beat wildly. Was this the god of cooking's inheritance? The god of cooking's menu. This is the last inheritance, the inheritance of the god of cooking's menu. However, the menu follows the ruthless path. If you really inherit it, you must erase all your emotions and forget them. Otherwise, your soul will be torn to pieces by the power in the god of cooking's menu. The god of cooking's voice was very distant. Bu Fong focused his eyes. Sure enough, the god of cooking walked the ruthless path. Although there was a wisp of emotion in it, it was still ruthless in nature. Therefore, if he wanted to inherit the god of cooking's inheritance, he had to choose ruthlessness. Bu Fong hesitated. He had been pursuing the path of the god of cooking for so long, and now he was almost at the end. He was just one step away. The end of the ruthless path was the god of cooking's menu. As long as he chose to accept it, he would become the new god of cooking. On the other hand, he had walked out of the emotional path. However, the emotional path was full of fog and had too many unknowns. On one side was the path of the predecessors, and on the other was his own path. Which should he choose? It was really a difficult choice. How should he choose? Bufang hesitated and pondered. A senseless lotus bloomed quietly in the darkness. Its beauty was beyond compare. With just a glance, one felt as if one's mind would be completely sucked away. Mu Hongzhi had once said that the senseless lotus could help him ward off a disaster. Was that what he was talking about? If he chose the path of the god of cooking, he would not be destroyed, which could be considered as blocking a disaster. However, if he chose the emotional path, he was very likely to die of old age on the path. Even at the end of his life, he would not be able to find the true emotional path of the god of cooking. The senseless lotus was so white that it could make people forget all their troubles. It was as holy as the purest thing in the world. Eating the senseless lotus could cut off the 7 emotions and 6 desires. It would save him a lot of hard cultivation. How should he choose? Bufang did not make a decision immediately. Instead, he sat cross-legged. The god of cooking gradually turned into Baiguang and dissipated. He disappeared between heaven and earth. Bufang looked at the senseless lotus and the god of cooking's menu in front of him. He sat in silence. After a long time, Bufang looked up. His eyes gradually became firm and determined. Finally, he raised his hand. A ball of divine flame emerged. The flame floated and enveloped the senseless lotus and the god of cooking's menu. The scorching flame rolled and burned the senseless lotus and the god of cooking's menu into nothingness. I, Bufang, don't need a way out. Ha ha ha! The god of cooking's laughter lingered between heaven and earth. There was a hint of loneliness in his laughter. 100 generations of hosts, but in the end he got a host who pursued the emotional path. Perhaps all of this was the true fate of the world. I hope you won't regret the choice you made today. The god of cooking said, since you've chosen the emotional path, I'll give you a hand. I hope you can really set foot on the highest peak. The god of cooking laughed. White spots of light slowly emerged and kept spreading toward Bufang. Like a hazy mist, they wrapped Bufang's body. Bufang stood quietly where he was. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. The highest? Perhaps there is no highest in the culinary path, only higher. Boom! More and more white spots of light appeared. Finally, Bufang's eyes were filled with countless white baiguang. He opened his eyes hazily, and his eyelashes fluttered. White snowflakes fell from the sky and landed on his face. A cold feeling seeped into his skin. He's alive? Chapter 1821. Snowflakes drifted in the air. His heart was lonely. Bufang opened his eyes and looked at the blue sky, slightly dazed. It was like a dream. What he had just experienced made him feel very complicated when he thought about it now. He sat up. A cold feeling came from his body. Bufang looked at his naked body and frowned. Snowflakes fell quietly from the sky and fell on his body. They were melted by his body temperature, turned into snow, and flowed down. Xiao Chun rubbed his hair, and his long and narrow hair spread out, brushing past his body, giving him a ticklish feeling. Standing up, Bufang glanced around. The heavy snow had sealed the mountain. The place where he was now should be deep in the mountains of planet immortality. He disappeared from this place and was reborn here. The gift that the god of cooking gave him was probably rebirth. However, Bufang was now a completely mortal. He had no cultivation base, and his fleshly body was no longer the extremely strong, chaotic saint body he had before. Bufang sucked in a cold breath and shook his head. Why did he have to strip himself naked? Where did the god of cooking get his bad taste? Was he going to freeze to death as soon as he was reborn? Bufang exhaled a breath of hot air and left the depths of the mountain. His footprints gradually disappeared in the wind and snow. Then, he left the snowy mountains. Bufang was dressed in shabby linen clothes. Instead of looking for the original restaurant, he hid his identity and sneaked into the city. With his cooking skills, he opened a restaurant. He began to cultivate again. While cultivating, he cooked. Strictly speaking, he could be considered reincarnation. However, His cultivation talent was much stronger than before. Perhaps because he had comprehended the emotional path, Bufong's cultivation speed was very fast. In the chaotic universe, a giant python stretched across the sky. With a sweep of her serpent tail, a star was shattered by her tail. A beam of green light flashed, and Hua fell into the chaos space with the food box. Her eyes were red and sad. He pursed his lips, hugged the lunchbox tightly, and walked into the chaos. In the primal chaos, the 5 great heavenly deity palaces had all appeared. They stood in the primal chaos, forming a profound formation. The formation sealed off the world, forming a powerful defense. When Hua landed in the chaos, he naturally attracted the attention of the people in the chaos. Lord Go, Hades' era, and little Hu Xiaopi flew over and hovered in the void. Suddenly, he appeared in front of Hua. They were all old acquaintances, and as soon as they met, they did not say anything. Hua was silent. Her red eyes made Lord Go and Hades' era sigh. They seemed to have already known something. In the heavenly time temple, the 4 heavenly deities stood there. Lord Go stared at Hua. "Little guy, did Bufong send you here?" Lord Go asked. Hua nodded, exhaled, and placed the lunchbox in front of Lord Go. "Bufong, he asked me to bring these to you," Hua said. She opened the lunchbox. She took out a dish from it. It was an extremely ordinary dish that was giving off steam. "This is Lord Go's sweet and sour ribs. Bufong gave it to you." Hua handed the sweet and sour ribs to Lord Go on a blue and white porcelain plate. Lord Go was stunned. His paws trembled slightly as he held the plate. The sweet and sour ribs with the juice flowing down was reflected in Lord Go's eyes. Swish! Lord Go looked at the sweet and sour ribs, and inexplicably, Bufong's face and voice appeared in his mind. "Alas, Bufong." Lord Go sighed. He and Xiao Bai had been Bufong's companions for the longest time. They had a tacit understanding of each other since Fong Fong's little store in the Light Wind Empire. Lord Go still remembered Bufong's appearance when he called him to eat sweet and sour ribs every day. The sweet and sour ribs in front of him didn't have any flashy energy, and it wasn't cooked with top-grade dragon meat. However, Lord Go felt depressed when he looked at it. He took a deep breath. Lord Go started to eat from the porcelain plate, just like how he ate happily in Fong Fong's little store in the Light Wind Empire. Bite by bite, while eating, Lord Go sighed. "It's delicious. This is the best sweet and sour ribs Lord Go has ever eaten, the most delicious dish. Unfortunately, I'd rather not eat it," Lord Go murmured. As soon as he finished speaking, the aura on his body fluctuated. Boom! A terrifying aura soared into the sky, as if it could shatter heaven and earth. This kind of pressure made many experts in the primal chaos extremely shocked. Heaven God time had begun to break through. From a top chaotic saint to a perfected chaotic saint. A single dish had created a perfected chaotic saint in the temple of Heaven God life. Hades' era's face was haggard. He supported his chin with one hand, looking at a spicy strip on the table. It was an ordinary spicy strip. It didn't have any light or energy. However, it made Era's heart tremble. Spicy strip, spicy strip. Could this be the last spicy strip Nether King Erha will ever eat? Bufong young man. Hades' era's eyes were misty as he ran his fingers through his hair. His eyes were slightly red. He picked up the spicy strip, put it in his mouth, and sucked it in and out. His nose was sore. He took a bite of the spicy strip, covered his mouth, and his eyes were wet. "I can't eat Bufong young man's spicy strips anymore." Hades' era was so sad that he could hardly breathe. He covered his face and sobbed. No one knew if he was really sad for the spicy strip or for Bufong. In the temple of Heaven God Destruction, Little Hu lay motionless on his back in the palace. Beside him was a meatball. In the temple of Heaven God Space, Xiaopi was lying in a jar of fine wine, bobbing up and down, his eyes rolling. He had really become a drunken shrimp. Hua looked at the chaos space, which was shrouded in sorrow. He sighed. Then, he turned into a giant python and flew across the starry sky. He went through the cosmic passage and came to the universe where Void City, was. In the distance, Void City floated quietly in the universe, looking calm and peaceful. Hua went all the way in. In the sky above Void City, a graceful and luxurious noblewoman emerged. She opened the passage and welcomed Hua in. In front of the Queen of Curse's palace, Hua landed. Xiao Ai, Kersey, and the four dukes appeared, looking at Hua with complicated eyes. Hua was now Bufang's spokesperson, but their emotions were getting more and more complicated. "Where's Sister Nethery?" Hua asked. Xiao Ai pointed at the Queen of Curse's palace. "Sister Nethery, the dish Bufang asked me to bring you is here," Bufang said. Kersey shook her head. "It's useless. Nethery can't hear us. Leave the dish with me. I'll give it to her when she comes out of seclusion." However, Hua shook his head. He just stared at the closed door of the Queen of Curse's palace. He stared at it for 3 days and 3 nights. Just when Hua was about to leave in disappointment, rumble, the door of the Queen of Curse's palace opened a slit. A crystal clear and beautiful arm, which looked like the most perfect arm in the world, stretched out from behind the palace. "Give it to me." Yu's cold voice came from it. Hua's face lit up. With a shake of his hand, the bowl of fried rice flew out, landed on the perfect arm, and was put into the Queen of Curse's palace. Rumble, after a long time, a terrible aura burst out of the Queen of Curse's palace. Kersey sighed as she gazed at the tightly shut palace gates. "I really don't know if it's a blessing or a curse." Yu was at the critical moment of inheriting the Queen's legacy, but she was distracted and came out to get a takeaway. She wondered if it would cause the legacy to fail. The primitive universe. In Hangu Pass, which stood majestically in the starry sky, 4 top experts sat in the starry sky, suppressing terrible existences. Formation after formation lingered in the starry sky. Every star seemed to contain absolute killing intent. Tongtian's face was cold. The immortal slaying sword array and the 10,000 immortal array were set up. Yuanshi Tianzuan held the Pangu axe and created arrays. Goddess Nuwa sat in the starry sky, injecting the energy of the 7-color divine stone into the arrays to maintain them. Bells rumbled. A Buddha kept chanting Buddhist scriptures. In the distance, a dish floated quietly in midair. Countless arrays were spreading around the dish. Suddenly, Tong Tian, who had his eyes closed, opened them, and they burst into a dazzling light. The pseudo-god of cooking dish, the stately painting, which was suppressing Soul God, was missing a piece. It was as if someone had swallowed a small piece of it. A chill instantly swept through Tong Tian's body. "Damn it, that guy has begun to struggle." Yuanshi, Tianzuan, Goddess Nuwa, and the Buddha all opened their eyes. On planet immortality, in an ordinary city-state, a young man began to rise slowly. He kept a low profile, but no one dared to provoke him. In his first year in the city-state, the young man opened an ordinary restaurant, which was as crowded as a marketplace. In the second year, the restaurant had become the focus of the royal family. No one dared to cause trouble in the restaurant. In the third year, the city's strongest expert came to the restaurant to cause trouble, but the owner suppressed him with a wave of his hand. From then on, no one dared to provoke the restaurant. Even the royal family treated it with respect. Bufang was wearing a white robe. After closing the restaurant's door and hanging a closed sign on it, he went upstairs to sleep. However, he did not sleep. Instead, he sat quietly cross-legged and began his daily cultivation. As he breathed, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was absorbed by Bufang like a whale. His body was shrouded in a faint light. In just 3 years, his cultivation base had risen rapidly. He had reached the level of an earth immortal, and he was only 1 step away from becoming a heaven immortal. In Bufang's opinion, all of this seemed reasonable. On planet immortality, with the departure of Bufang and Xiao Bai, many immortals had left the planet. However, there were still quite a few immortal experts on this planet. However, these immortals could not sense Bufang's presence at all. He seemed to have jumped out of the world and was growing quietly. In the 5th year, Bufang often suspended business. He left the restaurant and walked in the starry sky. He would stop at dead planets, and extract a bit of essence from them. In the 10th year, Bufang had no idea how long he had walked and how much essence he had extracted. In the 100th year, outside planet immortality, a sword light tore through the sky and landed in the city. When it dissipated, a figure with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes appeared. His aura was much more ethereal. Wu Shuang's eyes were calm, and his aura was extremely powerful. His sword intent seemed to be able to cut through the starry sky. Wu Shuang, a half-step saint, had calm eyes, as if he had seen through everything in the world. He had reached a bottleneck and returned to this planet because of nostalgia. He returned to the restaurant. The restaurant was gone. It was directly taken away by someone using a powerful technique, leaving only an empty ground. For 100 years, no one in the city had dared to occupy this land. Wu Shuang knew that the bull had taken the restaurant away and moved it to the Great Tianyuan world. According to the bull, the Great Tianyuan world was His Excellency's world. It was the only great world he had left in this world. Occasionally, he would go to the Great Tianyuan world for a walk. The spiritual energy there was very rich, and the scenery was very beautiful. He liked it very much. Most importantly, he could feel His Excellency's aura in the Great Tianyuan world. That aura fascinated him. Therefore, he would occasionally go to the Great Tianyuan world for a vacation. Now, he could be considered to be standing at the peak of this universe. However, he would not forget that everything he had was given to him by that man. Walking in the city, everything became very strange. For mortals, 100 years was a long time. The unparalleled sword god of the past was now only left in the records of legends. He walked the streets of the city on foot. Wu Shuang was a little nostalgic. During those 500 years, he often followed that man and walked like this. Come on, cooking god is open again. Hurry up, or there won't be any seats left. What? Cooking god is open again? What do you think? That cooking god is definitely an immortal. My father said that when he was still in diapers, the restaurant already existed in the city. Wu Shuang put his hands behind his back and closed his eyes, feeling the aura in the downtown area. Suddenly, voices resounded one after another. That gave Wu Shuang pause. Cooking god, how bold! Even that His Excellency didn't dare to call himself cooking god. Who is it? How dare he overestimate himself? Wu Shuang was expressionless. The sword on his back began to tremble faintly. Chapter 1822. The God of Cooking? Ridiculous. Only that man in the world could be called the God of Cooking. Wu Shuang's face was cold, and a sharp sword intent flashed in his eyes, causing heaven and earth to tremble. The simple and unadorned iron sword on his back was vibrating slowly, constantly emitting rumbling sounds. He looked at the direction in which the crowd was running. With his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Shuang followed. He wanted to see who this so-called God of Cooking was. Wu Shuang walked slowly along the long street. In the distance, the crowd gradually became crowded. He had not returned for 100 years, and now there was such a restaurant in the city. This was the first time he had seen such a popular restaurant since His Excellency passed away. To be able to attract so many people to line up, it must be something. For a moment, his heart was filled with a little curiosity. The front of the restaurant was bustling. Wu Shuang sucked in a cold breath when he saw the bustling crowd and the crowded heads of the crowd. How popular is this restaurant? His Excellency was nothing more than this in the past. Excuse me, is the food cooked by the chef in that restaurant really that good? Wu Shuang stopped a man in the queue and asked with a frown. Are you new here? Did you come from another city? Let me tell you, this restaurant has a long history. It's a century-old restaurant. It's always been this popular. My father said that when he was still in diapers, this restaurant was already very popular. The man seemed to find it boring to wait in line, so he pulled Wu Shuang aside and began a chat. The other teammates in line also joined in the conversation. They talked about all kinds of things, and finally, they talked about which brothel in the city had the prettiest girls. Wu Shuang left the discussion and narrowed his eyes. A century-old restaurant. He walked along the line. He came to the front. The queue stretched for 2 whole streets. It was really popular. Hey, brother, it's not good to cut the line like this, is it? Just as Wu Shuang walked to the front, a man in luxurious clothes at the front of the line became unhappy. He pulled Wu Shuang aside and said, "Come on." Wu Shuang frowned and turned his head. "What? Are you glaring at me? Let me tell you, no one is allowed to cause trouble in the god of cooking's restaurant. Even if there are immortals, he has beaten several of them away. Do you dare touch me?" The man was very smug. He raised his chin, and his head was almost touching Wu Shuang's face. Wu Shuang watched indifferently. This person was fearless. However, he couldn't be bothered to bicker with a mortal. Wu Shuang turned to look in the direction of the restaurant. The door of the restaurant opened. A thin figure walked out from within. Huh. Wu Shuang was stunned. Outside the door, the customers in the queue were instantly excited. God of cooking. The god of cooking has come out. How lucky. The god of cooking is really open for business today. I can taste the delicacies of the world again. How wonderful. The diners were extremely excited. Each and every one of them cheered. The young man in a brocade robe patted Wu Shuang on the shoulder and said, "Brother, be a good boy and line up. Maybe you'll get to eat the god of cooking's dishes." Wu Shuang ignored the young man. Instead, he stared in the direction of the restaurant. His breathing paused for a moment. That figure, Bu Fong, opened the door and rolled up the sleeves of his coarse linen shirt. His fair arms were exposed. Suddenly, he froze and looked out the door. Standing in front of the crowd was a familiar figure. Bu Fong raised his eyebrows. "Brother, I'm not trying to scold you. Do you know that cutting in line is a bad habit? You, F***CK." The young man was still trying to reason with Wu Shuang. Suddenly, Wu Shuang fell to his knees. His knees collided violently with the ground, and the ground crumbled. The young man in brocade robe was startled, and his breath caught in his throat. So fierce. For the sake of food, he even threw away his dignity? Brother, you win. But I'm giving way to you, but the people behind me won't allow it. The young man was still talking. Wu Shuang turned his head and glanced at the young man. The young man felt a chill run through him, and he raised his hand to cover his mouth. Damn it, I met an expert. In front of him, Wu Shuang's eyes were blurred, and tears were welling up in his eyes. The young man was so frightened that he could not speak. For the sake of food, he even used his best actor skills? Bu Fong looked at Wu Shuang. He did not expect to meet him here. "Come in." Bu Fong looked at Wu Shuang and said, "Yes, Your Excellency." Wu Shuang lifted his sleeve and wiped the tears off his face. "His Excellency is not dead. His Excellency is not dead. This is really great." Wu Shuang rose to his feet and walked straight into the restaurant. "Excuse me, everyone. This is my old friend. Please make an exception for him," Bu Fong said lightly to the people waiting in line. "Ha! God of cooking, please don't laugh at us. Why would we care? Go ahead. This brother is handsome, so we don't care. If only His Excellency could open the restaurant a little longer today." The customers were very reasonable. Of course, there was nothing they could do about it. After all, Bu Fong's power was very terrifying. He was a big shot who did not even give face to the imperial family. A restaurant could be open for 100 years without changing its owner. This meant that the owner might be an immortal master. Wu Shuang stepped into the restaurant and looked around. He looked around the restaurant, and a familiar style brought tears to his eyes. Sword immortal Dugu Wu Shuang, whose heart of the sword path was as firm as a rock, could not help but cry at this moment. It was too nostalgic. All of this, not bad. Your cultivation is progressing very quickly. Going out for a walk is indeed beneficial. The corners of Bu Fong's mouth lifted as he looked at Wu Shuang. Wu Shuang rubbed his head in embarrassment and said, "I'm not as good as you, my lord. Don't be embarrassed. You're only half a step away from becoming a saint of the Great Path." Bu Fong said, "Help me greet the customers. We'll talk after the service is over." Bu Fong said. Wu Shuang put down his sword, rolled up his sleeves, and grinned. "Leave it to Wu Shuang. Although I haven't entertained guests for more than 100 years, I don't know if my skills are rusty." Wu Shuang chuckled. Turning around, He walked to the door and began to arrange the customers in an orderly manner. The corners of Bu Fong's mouth twitched as he turned around and entered the kitchen. The business situation was very simple. From sunrise to sunset, a day's business was over. Wu Shuang, on the other hand, was extremely excited. Standing at the door, he kept waving and soliciting customers. This guy is addicted to soliciting customers. Well, today's business is over. Bu Fong could not help but remind him. Wu Shuang rubbed his head. At this moment, he did not seem to be a peerless sword immortal, but a child. He closed the restaurant. Bu Fong came out of the kitchen with a few dishes. He was carrying a porcelain jar of wine. "Sit down and have some," Bu Fong said. Then, he poured Wu Shuang a glass of wine. Wu Shuang grinned and sat down in front of Bu Fong. Looking at Bu Fong, who looked exactly the same as when he first met him, Wu Shuang felt a sense of wonder. "Your Excellency, aren't you?" Bu Fong picked up a mouthful of food and took a sip of wine. A blush appeared on his face. "I'm not dead, am I?" Bu Fong said lightly. Wu Shuang nodded. "You were dead, but you came back to life," Bu Fong said. Wu Shuang took a deep breath. Not only did Bu Fong come back to life, but his cultivation base was also unfathomable to Wu Shuang. "His Excellency is really amazing." "Your Excellency, aren't you going to see your old friend?" Wu Shuang asked, puzzled. "No, it's not the time yet." Bu Fong shook his head and continued to eat and drink. Wu Shuang picked up a pair of chopsticks, picked up some food, and put it in his mouth. As soon as it entered his mouth, his whole body trembled. There was a look of shock in his eyes. It's delicious." It was a simple dish, but it amazed Wu Shuang. The magic power in his body surged as if it was about to break through the barrier. That was the Saint Barrier. It had baffled countless geniuses. "Don't worry, your foundation is still lacking. Eat more food and don't rush to break through." Wu Shuang's face turned red, and he wanted to seize the opportunity to break through the barrier. However, Bu Fong had appeared behind him at some point. As he shouted, he placed a palm on his shoulder. Wu Shuang's fluctuating magic power was suppressed again. Unfathomable. Bu Fong's aura made Wu Shuang's heart tremble. A saint of the Great Path? A chaotic saint. In just 100 years, His Excellency has returned to the peak. Bu Fong continued to drink. "Hurry up and eat. When you're done, I still have something to do. You're back at the right time. Help me protect me." Bu Fong said. "Oh, protect me?" Wu Shuang paused. "Is His Excellency going to break through again?" Wu Shuang hurriedly picked up the bowl and stuffed the rice and the food into his mouth. As soon as he did, he narrowed his eyes and let out a few cries. "It's so F***king delicious. I'm so F***king touched. It's a familiar taste, a familiar feeling." Gulp, gulp. The wine entered his mouth. His mouth was filled with the aroma of wine. Even with his cultivation base, he felt a little drunk. "Your Excellency, this wine is amazing. It's even better than the best wine in the celestial court. What kind of treasure of heaven and earth did it use to make it?" Wu Shuang exclaimed. "Rice." Bu Fong glanced at him and said lightly, "There was no such thing as treasure of heaven and earth. All his delicacies were made from ordinary ingredients." After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Wu Shuang leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. For the first time in 100 years, he was so satisfied with food. "Are you full? Then come with me," Bu Fong said. Wu Shuang nodded and followed them. Bu Fong went upstairs and went to his room. Wu Shuang followed obediently behind him. As soon as he opened the door of the room, Wu Shuang, who was behind Bu Fong, narrowed his eyes. "Hiss!" The sound of people sucking in breaths of surprise rang out. This is..." Wu Shuang stammered, not knowing what to say. "Don't be surprised. It's just the origin of some stars." Bu Fong said lightly. "How can I not be surprised? You've shrunk the whole universe and moved it into this room, haven't you? What is Your Excellency going to do?" Wu Shuang's mind was full of questions. "I'm afraid it's not enough. After all, I'm going to resurrect an old friend." The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. About to give him the best, Wu Shuang's eyes froze. The next moment, Bu Fong raised his hand. With a flick of his finger, buzz ripples appeared in the void, and a simple power slowly spread out. Wu Shuang narrowed his eyes. The endless origin of stars in the room all lit up as if the whole universe was operating. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bu Fong walked in the universe. Wu Shuang's body tensed up. "Guard me outside the room." "Well, help me hide my aura. I've set up an array in advance. But just in case, help me erase the extra aura that seeps out," Bu Fong said. Wu Shuang's eyes narrowed, and then he nodded. He seemed to know what Bu Fong was going to do. But the iron sword on his back flew out. In a flash, thousands of swords tore through the sky. "I'm here. The restaurant is here. Leave everything to me," Wu Shuang said resolutely. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly. With a bang, the door of the restaurant closed. The starlight disappeared. The iron sword hovered beside Wu Shuang, and there was a nostalgic look in his eyes. "Is that iron lump coming back? My lord will succeed." Wu Shuang had a firm belief in his heart. The corner of his mouth twitched. With a thought in his mind, he sat cross-legged in midair. Holding the iron sword, he placed it on his legs. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, a terrifying aura suddenly burst out. Chapter 1823. During these 100 years, Bu Fong began to cultivate again. In fact, he didn't really focus on cultivation. Cooking was actually his cultivation. It was a process of improving himself. In this process, the improvement of his cultivation base was only a side effect. More importantly, it was the improvement of his cooking skills through the emotional path. It was an extremely mysterious situation. When Bu Fong woke up, he would find that he had broken through to the immortal king realm. And when he woke up again, he would find that he had become a saint of the great path. Of course, the time spent in this process was not short. For Bu Fong, 100 years was not a short time. It could also be called a long time. During these 100 years, as his cultivation base improved, he gradually gained a long life, a youthful face, and a more experienced emotion. He walked in the starry sky, shuttling through every dead star. He searched for the origin of a dead star, the glimmer of hope for life. In each of the stars, there was one of his dishes. One dish revived a star, making the grass grow, the birds fly, and the water gurgle. Bu Fong, on the other hand, took the star's origin. It was a kind of exchange. A dead star was still a star, even though it had been dead for hundreds of thousands or millions of years. However, Bu Fong did not cut off the hope of this star. He even gave it new hope. On planet Immortality, in a restaurant in the city, Wu Shuang sat cross-legged in midair, holding an iron sword in one hand and looking straight at the sky with bright eyes. Why did he need to protect him? After thinking about it, Wu Shuang figured it out. His Excellency did not want people to know, or rather, he did not want the fluctuation to spread. So he needed to protect him. Therefore, Wu Shuang would do his best. With his sword blocking the way, even if a saint of the great path attacked, he would not be able to break through. Rumble. A rumbling sound rang out. A powerful aura began to erupt in the restaurant. Wu Shuang's pupils constricted. His powerful divine sense spread out in an instant. At this moment, everything on planet Immortality was enveloped by his divine sense. Nowadays, there were many sects on planet Immortality, and these were all powerful immortal cultivation sects with immortals presiding over them. These immortals came from the Urwild's continent. At this moment, Wu Shuang's divine sense spread out. The immortal patriarchs of many sects opened their eyes in alarm. What a terrifying sword intent! Wu Shuang, that peerless sword god has returned to planet Immortality. This kind of sword will, I'm afraid it can kill a sage. Many ancestral patriarchs were trembling. The strongest among them was only an immortal king, so they did not dare to fight Wu Shuang head-on. So, they naturally chose not to fight him. They even asked the disciples of the immortal sects not to step into Dugu Wu Shuang's domain. Otherwise, they would be expelled from the immortal sect and killed without mercy. After all, with how big the sect was, there were bound to be some blind disciples who would foolishly provoke some enemies. Wu Shuang was domineering. If his sect was destroyed because of a disciple, it would be a great injustice. Many immortals released their auras to show their goodwill to Wushuang from afar. Of course, there were also some immortals who were curious and wanted to find out why Wushuang did this. Wushuang sat cross-legged in midair with his eyes closed. Beneath him, a simple array formation hovered around the restaurant. However, although it looked simple, it was actually very complicated. His Excellency's attainment in arrays has improved. Compared with the gourmet array, this array is even more terrifying and profound. Wushuang exclaimed. Under the cover of the array, not even the slightest aura was released. In the distance, immortal energy curled up. Many immortals were watching from afar. Scram, Wushuang said indifferently. He raised his sword and flicked it lightly with his finger. Suddenly, the cry of a sword rang out. In the distance, an immortal hiding in the void snorted coldly. Wushuang's eyes widened. Without saying a word, he slashed out with his sword. A sword pierced through the void, instantly slashing towards the immortal expert who was hiding in the void. Rumble. A terrible sword energy swept across heaven and earth. In midair, an immortal let out a miserable howl as he was cut in half by Wushuang. Scram, or I'll kill you without mercy, Wushuang said indifferently with his eyes closed. In the end, the immortals retreated. In the restaurant, endless starlight filled the air. It was a small room, but in fact, it was like a miniature starry sky. Bufang had used Sumri Universe to make the room larger than a great world. This great world, on the other hand, was only dotted with stars. These stars were not simple. They were the origin of stars. The price of the origin of stars was extremely high. They were very difficult to collect, but once they were collected, they were good materials for forging. Bufang walked among them. With his hands clasped behind his back, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. In the past 100 years, he had collected so many stars' origins. He could have continued to collect, but he had already collected all the dead stars' origins in this region. If he wanted to continue, he could only collect the stars' origins with lives. This was contrary to his wish, so he ended the collection. He was tired of walking. Bufang sat down and raised his hand. He raised his hand. His palm was fair and untainted by a speck of dust. His eyes were soft. Was a strange fluctuation spread. In an instant, the stars' origins hanging in the sky began to fly at high speed. They kept gathering in Bufang's hand. They began to gather quickly. They grew bigger and bigger. Countless star essences converged to form a giant, circular star. The star was so huge that Bufang looked like a speck of dust in it. A speck of dust that was extremely small. Bufang grabbed a star. The huge star was extremely heavy. However, Bufang's robe fluttered in the wind. He raised his other hand. A golden flame quietly spread out, instantly spreading to the whole star, and began to burn. Burned by the flame, the star shone as brightly as the sun. It was exuding supreme power. Bufang watched indifferently. Buzz, a powerful fluctuation of the law spread out. The flow of time around the star suddenly sped up tens of thousands of times. The golden flame, in a breath, was equivalent to burning the star for tens of thousands of years. It was a very mysterious feeling. Time went by little. Bufang controlled the golden flame to burn the star. The star's original huge shape began to shrink as it burned. On planet Immortality, time passed slowly. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, Wushuang sat cross-legged in the void like a supreme sword god. No immortal dared to show up. Bufang was in the restaurant, quietly controlling the golden flame to burn the star. The star was getting smaller and smaller. After hundreds of millions of years, the star became the size of a house. Countless years passed again. The star was only half the size of a house now. The refinement was still going on. Bufang did not know how to refine artifacts. But, at his current level, even if he didn't understand, he could still do extremely well. He controlled the flame to burn. After a long time, Bufang stood up. He reached out his hand and slapped the star with his fair palm. He did it slowly, neither too fast nor too slow. It was like kneading a clay figurine. Before long, a huge human figure was formed. It had a round head and a fat belly. It looked somewhat familiar. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. His movements were not slow. With every slap, the figure became clearer and clearer. He was using the essence of the star to refine a body. Once this body took shape, it would probably be comparable to a saint of the Great Path. The body gradually became clearer, and an oppressive aura fluctuated. However, this was just a body. Without a soul, what it lacked was a kind of agility. On planet Immortality, Rumble, the whole planet underwent a great change at this moment. In a flash, the density of spiritual energy on planet Immortality skyrocketed like boiling water. Colorful light bloomed in the sky, and the sound of the Great Path rang out. Chains of law fell from the sky. Auspicious dragons, divine phoenixes, and all kinds of auspicious signs appeared between heaven and earth. Wushuang could not help but take a deep breath when he saw this phenomenon. It had begun. This was the most important moment. Wushuang rose to his feet, holding the iron sword with one hand. The sword was simple and unremarkable. It was made for him by Tong Tian, a perfected saint of the primitive universe. Although Tong Tian did not accept him as a disciple, he thought highly of his swordsmanship. Therefore, he gave the sword to Wushuang. It was a simple sword, even a little ugly, but it was very easy for Wushuang to wield. In the distance, immortals appeared together. Wushuang's eyes shone brightly. I said, "Scram." He said coldly. A terrible, murderous aura towered into the sky. Although he was only a half-step saint, his strength was no weaker than that of a saint of the Great Path. Wushuang, don't be too domineering. When treasures of heaven and earth appear, only those who are fated can have them. Don't think you're really invincible. You'll fight to the death if you cut off a man's path of cultivation. Wushuang, if you have what it takes, let's have a fair competition. The immortals shouted. Their voices were like thunder, constantly resounding in the sky. These immortals were all from the primitive universe, and their power was unparalleled. There was no doubt that the phenomenon and the feeling of spiritual energy surging were the birth of treasures of heaven and earth. How could they give up this opportunity? They were all seeking the Tao on the path of immortality. Since they were seeking the Tao, they naturally would not give up this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Only those who are fated can have them. Wushuang twitched the corner of his mouth and shook his head. Who do you think you are? How dare you call yourselves fated? How presumptuous! The immortals flew into a rage. Although Wushuang was strong, he looked down on them like this, which made them angry. However, Wushuang had his domineering air. His cultivation base was a half-step saint. So many people did not dare to be presumptuous. Rumble. Wushuang grabbed the sword. The sword slashed at the void. The tide of spiritual energy was cleaved right through the middle, and all the immortals retreated in terror. Rumble. Above the 9 heavens, there was a terrifying pressure pressing down. It was the arrival of many half-step saints. These half-step saints were all looking for an opportunity to break through to the saint realm. How could they let go of the treasures of planet Immortality? Perhaps with the help of these treasures, they could become saints overnight. Rumble. Rumble. There was no doubt that these half-step saints were summoned by these immortals. However, Wushuang was fearless. Grabbing the iron sword, he let out a loud cry and swung it. He did not flinch in the face of these half-step saints. I said, "All of you, get the hell out of here." Countless half-step saints launched terrible attacks and collided with Wushuang's sword energy. Heaven and earth shattered, and planet Immortality trembled violently. When these fluctuations approached the array, they were directly neutralized by it. Moreover, the city, which was enveloped by the array, was not damaged in the slightest. Whether they were mortals or cultivators, they all knelt on the ground, shivering and not daring to breathe loudly. When immortals fought, mortals suffered. They did not know when a disaster would befall them. When immortals fought, destroying a country was nothing. The light aftershock was enough to kill them. However, this time, the shockwave was actually blocked. Many mortals looked blankly in the direction of the restaurant. In the restaurant, Bufong looked at the iron lump in front of him and breathed a sigh of relief. It was the same as the one in Xiaobai's books. The familiar look made Bufong feel nostalgic. It had been many years since he last saw it. The god of cooking's will had disappeared. Xiaobai could not hold on for too long. The only reason he could hold on for 500 years was that he had absorbed a lot of energy from the soul demons. After Bufong died of old age, Xiaobai was taken back by the god of cooking. Xiaobai was created by the god of cooking, so he would naturally be taken back after his merits were fulfilled. Bufong, on the other hand, no longer needed Xiaobai. Looking at Xiaobai, who was emotionless and lifeless, Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. Even though he had refined a body, a soulless Xiaobai was not Xiaobai. Bufong took a step back. He raised his hand. A quaint cooking utensil emerged in his palm. Bufong began to cook a dish. There was a complicated look in his eyes, with many emotions swirling in them. Xiaobai had no soul, and Xiaobai was no longer in the transmigration. It was basically impossible to resurrect Xiaobai, because Xiaobai had truly disappeared from heaven and earth. However, in Bufong's view, there was nothing that could not be solved with one dish. If there was, then he would cook too. Ingredients flew in all directions as Bufong cooked unhurriedly. The iron lump stood mercilessly in the distance. Bufong's movements were as smooth as flowing water. He opened the steamer, and hot steam billowed out. There was only a steamed bun in the steamer. The bun was white and tender, with a round head and a fat belly. Bufong took it out. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched slightly as he felt the heat. Memories flooded his eyes, and he thought of many things. Starting from the Light Wind Empire, memories about Xiaobai kept surging in his mind. The white bun Xiaobai's eyes seemed to slowly brighten. They glowed with golden light. Looking at the white bun Xiaobai in his hand, Bufong raised the corner of his mouth. Then, he walked to the front of the giant iron lump. The latter's round belly instantly turned into a bottomless black hole. Bufong put the white bun Xiaobai in it. Slowly, it was like sinking to the bottom of the sea. The white bun Xiaobai gradually disappeared. However, its golden eyes were getting brighter and brighter. Bufong took a step back. The origin of stars and the surroundings had all been used, making the starry sky pitch black. However, in this pitch-black darkness, two beams of golden light suddenly shot out. The iron lump raised its fan-like palm, scratching its round head. "Xiaobai, come back." Bufong exhaled and said in an indifferent voice. Chapter 1824. Whitey raised its hand and scratched its round head. Its mechanical eyes emitted a dazzling golden light. His mechanical eyes burst into a dazzling golden light as he looked at Bufong. Bufong put his hands behind his back, looked at Xiaobai in the dark, and could not help but nod. Xiaochen raised his hand and patted Little White's round belly. The feedback he received was not as cold as before. Instead, it felt a little warm. Xiaobai scratched his head. Bufong looked at Xiaobai and felt that Xiaobai seemed to have gained a little more humanity. It was a familiar feeling and aura. Xiaobai is finally back. Wu Shuang stood in the sky, one man and one sword. As a sword immortal, his fighting prowess was extraordinary, and the last thing he was afraid of was numbers. In the distance, many immortals were approaching from the void. The light that burst out of the restaurant became more and more obvious, as if it was going to break through the sky and shatter the clouds. The immortals were getting more and more excited. This level of light was the light that could help one attain the Tao. It seemed to be on par with the 10 great divine artifacts of the primitive universe. How could they give up such an opportunity? Several half-step saints could not help but attack. Powerful fluctuations of magic power swept through heaven and earth. All kinds of magic treasures fell from the sky. Wu Shuang, on the other hand, was fearless. Holding an iron sword, he swung it back. A terrible sword-intent soared into the sky. It collided with the magic treasures of many immortals. Although Bu Fong had said that a little energy would leak in the process of resurrecting his old friend, the leakage of this light was not just a little. However, Wu Shuang did not care. Since His Excellency had asked him to guard the restaurant, he would not let these people step into the restaurant, even if he had to die. The half-saint experts emerged together in midair, and all of them had shocked expressions on their faces. A half-step Saint Sword Immortal was indeed terrifying. One man and one sword actually rendered them helpless. Some of the magic treasures were even cut in half by Wu Shuang's sword. The mortals below were all dumbfounded. This kind of aura of one person against 10,000 immortals was simply too cool. Some of the veteran half-step saints flew into a rage out of humiliation. Wu Shuang had only stepped into the Tao for a few hundred years, yet he was able to block the joint attack of so many half-step saints. However, when he thought about how Wu Shuang had followed that man for 500 years, it made sense. However, that man had already passed away. They would not hand over the opportunity to Wu Shuang just like that. They hoped to use this opportunity to become a saint of the Great Path. So how could they give up so easily? Fight! A huge bronze cauldron appeared in the sky and smashed down toward Wu Shuang. Around the cauldron, all kinds of magical treasures floated and sank, forming a terrifying array. As the array trembled, energy blasted at Wu Shuang, causing the restaurant's array to glow with colorful light. Wu Shuang sneered. Holding the sword, he performed the sword technique. He danced alone in the void. His sword was not the kind of sword that swung with great force. Instead, it was a soft sword. As he swung it, it was as if emotions were bursting forth from within. As he danced with his sword, he sang a sword song. At this moment, Wu Shuang's aura kept rising. It was as if he had broken through to the level of a saint of the Great Path. The terrible fighting prowess of a sword immortal was brought out by him to the extreme. Rumble. The bronze cauldron was cut in half by the sword. The immortal controlling the bronze cauldron coughed up blood and flew backward, his face pale and unsightly. Many magical treasures were destroyed by the sword energy. One slash after another. It was extremely powerful. Wu Shuang's 7 emotions sword song. One of the half-step saints said with a serious face. Wu Shuang held the sword and said indifferently, "Get out of here." The faces of the other half-step saints turned unsightly. The immortals who were watching secretly sucked in their breaths. The mortals down below roared with excitement. He's so cool. Sword God Dugu defeated all the immortals with one sword. Suddenly, Wu Shuang frowned. He looked into the distance. There, immortal energy swirled around him. A golden staff fell from the sky. Beams of golden light burst out of it. A Buddha's head emerged, radiating dazzling golden light. Wu Shuang narrowed his eyes. The Buddha of a saint of the Great Path. Did he attract a saint of the Great Path after all? Wu Shuang took a deep breath, but he did not find it strange. After all, it's not surprising that something made by His Excellency has attracted a saint of the Great Path. Benefactor, let me have a look. If the treasure is not mine, I'll leave immediately, the Buddha said with a smile. When the Buddha smiled, he looked charmingly naive. However, Wu Shuang was too lazy to pay attention to him. This was what the Buddha meant. If it was fated, he would take it. How could there be such a good thing? If you wanted to let you have it, you'll have to ask my sword first. Wu Shuang bowed his head and said indifferently. Sword intent erupted from his body, turned into a peerless sword, and went straight for the Buddha. The Buddha was a saint of the Great Path, so Wu Shuang did not dare to be careless. Although he was a sword immortal, the strength of a saint of the Great Path was very terrifying, so he had to go all out. In that case, I'll have to offend you. The Buddha smiled and shook his head. Then, he performed a Buddhist incantation gesture and threw it at Wu Shuang. Wu Shuang gripped the sword and slashed it out. In the boundless starry sky outside planet Immortality, many terrifying auras were watching. There was no doubt that the light had already alarmed the primitive universe. The Buddha's incantation gesture collided with the sword light. Wu Shuang gave a muffled snort, and his indomitable sword intent was forced to a halt. However, he was fearless. He laughed, sang a sword song, and danced with his sword in the starry sky. Every strike was filled with unparalleled emotions, and within those emotions was a killing intent that filled the sky. The sword moved like a dragon. Although the Buddha was a saint of the great path, he was suppressed. Frowning, Wu Shuang held the golden staff in his hand. The golden rings on the staff collided with each other, producing a tinkling sound. Rumble. The sword energy and the Buddha's light collided in midair, causing explosions. Wu Shuang felt extremely strained. Rumble. All of a sudden, outside planet immortality, another expert made a move. He was also a saint of the great path, and his terrible aura blotted out the sky. This time it was a Taoist. Sitting cross-legged in the starry sky, his eyes gleaming, he threw out a huge hand that blotted out the sky. Wu Shuang roared and slashed at the hand with his sword. Bam! His body suddenly trembled violently, causing his chi and blood to rumble. However, this was not the end. He seemed to have sensed Wu Shuang's limit. Outside the starry sky, another expert made a move. A spear tore through the sky and went straight for Wu Shuang's chest. It was a barbarian clad in animal skin, his eyes gleaming. On planet immortality, the mortals were forced to kneel on the ground, not daring to move at all. The pressure was too great. When immortals fought, they could only watch in fear. Wu Shuang was forced to retreat. His iron sword was as red as a soldering iron. The magic power of a saint of the great path hit him so hard that it seemed to be on the verge of breaking. Crack! A line spread across the iron sword. Then a boom rang out. In Wu Shuang's eyes, the iron sword cracked in an instant. Rumble. The Buddha, the Taoist, and the barbarian landed on planet immortality at the same time. They rushed madly toward the treasure light. All the auspicious signs were dispersed. The three of them attacked at the same time. Their terrible auras suppressed the sky. Wu Shuang's eyes narrowed. Get lost. He turned into a sword and slashed out. Suddenly, a thin figure appeared beside him. He pressed his shoulder. It's all right. It's over. Bufang appeared and said lightly. Wu Shuang paused. Then a look of joy came over his face as he looked at Bufang. His Excellency is here. Everything will be fine. Bufang glanced at the broken iron sword. He raised his hand. The fragments of the iron sword fell into Bufang's hand. He raised his hand. The source of stars fell into his hand. Good. There's still a little bit left. I can help you repair the iron sword. Bufang said. His mental force spread like a spring breeze. Soon, the iron sword was restored to its original state. It was still an ordinary iron sword. However, there seemed to be a strange feeling in it. When Wu Shuang held it, he felt a dependence in the depths of his soul. It was the resonance of the emotional path, the resonance of Wu Shuang's 7 emotions, sword path, and the emotional path. Your Excellency, what about them? Wu Shuang said, holding the iron sword. It doesn't matter. Let's wait and see. This is a good opportunity for an old friend to practice. The corner of Bu Fang's mouth twitched. There seemed to be a hint of playfulness in his eyes. That gave Wu Shuang pause. Rumble. The Buddha, the Taoist, and the barbarian approached the restaurant. They raised their hands, trying to grab the spot where the light was coming from. Suddenly, the door of the restaurant was pushed open. The three of them froze. A huge figure walked out of the restaurant. Xiaobai appeared with a round head and a round belly. His golden mechanical eyes swiveled as he stared at the 3 experts in midair. He did not seem to have any aura of magic power. What is this? The 3 experts paused. Who cares what he is? Let's beat him up. The barbarian grabbed the spear and threw it at Xiaobai. The terrifying sound of something tearing through the air emitted a violent sound. The scent of the great path was quite terrifying. Xiaobai's mechanical eyes flashed. He raised his hand. Then his huge palm grabbed the spear. There was a cracking sound. The spear was crushed by Xiaobai. The Buddha, the Taoist, and the barbarian were shocked. The barbarian's eyes burned like torches. All of a sudden, there was a flash of light. Whitey's body disappeared on the spot. When he reappeared, he landed in front of the three experts. "You." The barbarian was shocked. He threw a punch. This punch was powerful and heavy, and the terrifying fluctuations almost caused the void to collapse. Bam! However, the punch hit Xiao Bai's huge palm, but it did not cause any ripples. Terrifying. Unfathomable. The barbarian was shocked. He stared at Xiao Bai. All of a sudden, his pupils constricted as if he had thought of something. You're an iron puppet." Boom. Xiao Bai slapped him in the face. The barbarian was stunned and swallowed the words he was about to say. Rip. The animal skin was torn. The barbarian's body was exposed to the void just like that. The mortals below let out cries of surprise. The corner of Wu Shuang's mouth twitched. In the distance, the Buddha and the Taoist were also shocked. The more they looked at Xiao Bai, the more familiar they felt. The sense of familiarity that enveloped their hearts made their hearts throb. It was as if they had thought of something terrible. The Buddha grabbed his staff and was about to retreat. The Taoist also flew away. However, Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes swept over. With a sweep of his fan-like palm, he directly pulled the two of them back. "Troublemakers will be stripped as an example to others," Xiao Bai said. His voice was no longer as mechanical and cold as before. On the contrary, there was a sense of rhythm to the music. "What the F***CK?" The Taoist was shocked. He had a bad feeling. Rip. The Taoist robe, which was an immortal artifact, was torn to pieces. The Buddha was the same. He watched in despair as his robe was torn to pieces and floated in the air. The crazy clothes stripping demon. He was back. Chapter 1825. Xiao Bai had returned. In midair, Wu Shuang was inexplicably excited. Although he wasn't very familiar with the metal puppet by his master's side, it had been a few hundred years, and that metal puppet had long been his companion and friend. In fact, Wu Shuang knew very well that the iron puppet was not really a puppet. It actually had emotions. However, that kind of emotion was like a small seed deeply planted in the depths of his heart. As long as it was watered, it would bloom, and now that flower could be considered to have completely bloomed. "You're quite energetic, and your skills are not rusty." In midair, Bufang nodded faintly. He seemed to be quite satisfied with Xiao Bai's means. Xiao Bai's skill of stripping was as strong as ever. Even an immortal could be stripped in one move. So what if the opponent was a saint of the Great Path? He could still strip them and throw them out. The origin of almost all the dead stars in the universe had fused into Xiao Bai's body. He had used the best equipment and was catalyzed by delicious food. Now, Xiao Bai could be considered to have been reborn. Bufang did not know how strong his fighting capacity was. Perhaps he had surpassed Xiao Bai, or perhaps he was even stronger. The Buddha, the Taoist, and the barbarian were all stripped by Xiao Bai with one move. They could not resist at all. They seemed to remember something. This puppet, it seemed to be famous in the primitive universe. But hadn't it been reduced to dust? Why did they meet it on this ordinary planet? Such a fearsome existence was not weaker than a chaotic saint. The Taoist, the Buddha, and the barbarian were all the top experts in their respective worlds. But at this moment, they had no confidence in facing Xiao Bai. He was too strong. He stripped them in one move, whether it was their Taoist robes, kasayas, or even their animal skins. The spiritual energy that filled the air after the magic artifact were torn to pieces drifted in the air. Watering heaven and earth had benefited planet immortality. The mortals could feel the energy flowing out of the magic artifacts, and their bodies were getting stronger. More and more mortals knelt on the ground. These were all real immortals. Xiao Bai's golden mechanical eyes scanned the area. The Taoist, the Buddha, and the barbarian stiffened. Without hesitation, they wrapped themselves in their clothes and flew across the void. He had escaped. With such a puppet around, there was no need for them to fight for treasures. It would be good enough if they could survive. In fact, they had no idea that the treasure they sought was the puppet itself. The Taoist, the Buddha, and the barbarian left. Bufang did not try to stop him. In fact, there was no need to intercept them. The latter wasn't wrong either. It was the nature of cultivators to pursue natural treasures. Boom! Xiao Bai took a step forward. As if he had crossed the river of time, he appeared in front of Bufang. He raised his fan-like hand and rubbed his head. He patted White Yi's belly and twitched the corner of his mouth. Wu Shuang sheathed his iron sword. After being refined by Bufang, the sword was now as powerful as a divine artifact of the primitive universe. Wu Shuang naturally took good care of it. Putting away the sword, he cupped his fist and bowed to Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai also raised his fan-like hand in a daze and mimicked the latter's gesture. Compared with the former Xiao Bai, the current Xiao Bai could be said to have just awakened his intelligence. However, many things that belonged to the former Xiao Bai were deeply engraved in his memory. Xiao Bai was still the same Xiao Bai, but he was a little more humane than the cold iron puppet Xiao Bai. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back. He looked down at the mortals below. He raised his hand and waved it gently. His magic power spread out, and the mortal world immediately tumbled. Everything returned to normal. The array dissipated. Xiao Bai, Wu Shuang, and Bufang landed in the restaurant one after another. Your Excellency, are you going to stay here forever? Wu Shuang asked. He was very excited about Bufang's resurrection. He could not even tell how strong Bufang was now. In any case, he was at least stronger than him. Even if he used the 7-emotion sword path, he might not be able to defeat Bufang. Isn't it good to stay here? Go out more in the mortal world. Even if you want to leave in the future, you won't have a chance. The corner of Bufang's mouth lifted slightly. He was not in a hurry. There were still nearly 400 years before Soul God woke up. Besides, with Bufang's current cultivation base, he might not be able to defeat Soul God. He still needed to cultivate slowly and reach the peak of the emotional cooking path. Wu Shuang did not understand. He nodded and said nothing. However, he and Bufang both had endless life now, so he was not in a hurry. Wherever Bufang went, he would go, and he would follow him until his death. In the temple of Heaven God, Time, Lord Go lay lazily outside the Heaven God temple, basking in the sun. He had no choice but to bask in the sun. He had no sweet and sour ribs, so he could only waste his time like this. Basking in the sun, a day passed. Hades' era, on the other hand, was a lot more unrestrained. He did not eat the spicy strip, but kept it for himself. Bufang's dishes were immortal, so they would not rot even after hundreds of years. From time to time, when he wanted to eat them, he would take out the spicy strip and take a bite. Of course, he had to restrain himself, or he would finish it in less than a year. Little Who was very naughty. After all, Heaven God Destruction could blow up the chaos space with a meatball he spat out. Xiaopi was somewhat like Lord Go. He basked in the sun and blew bubbles every day. Heaven God Space, who could go anywhere, had become a lazy guy who could not even be bothered to move. Without Bufang, they all became dispirited. Time passed. Another 100 years passed in a flash. For the chaos space, 100 years was nothing. For Void City, 100 years did not seem to feel like it had passed at all. It seemed like it was only yesterday that Hua came to deliver the dish. In Void City, Hua had also settled down, sitting cross-legged and cultivating. At first, Flowery wanted to stay at Lord Dog's place. However, Nethery was receiving the inheritance. She thought about it and decided to stay. It could be considered protecting Nethery. In Hangu Pass, the towering pass was split in half from the middle, looking a ghastly sight. Immortals and deities sat cross-legged on the pass, fusing their powerful magic power into the void and filling up the array. The dish was surrounded by densely packed formations. Each of them seemed to contain supreme pressure. However, what was truly shocking was the dishes in the array formation were bitten again and again and again. Half of the dish was eaten. This caused fear to spread in the hearts of many people. It was as if that battle was still vivid in their minds. They could not forget the terrible scene of Soul God's emergence and the shaking of heaven and earth. Buzz, a beam of sword light soared into the sky. Tong Tian hovered in midair, stepping on an immortal sword and flying around the array. He looked at the dish. It seemed to have formed a realm of its own, suppressing Soul God in it. Tong Tian put his hands behind his back, his Taoist robe flapping noisily in the wind. He stared at the half-eaten dish, feeling a little uneasy. For perfected, chaotic saints like them, 1,000 years was just a snap of their fingers. However, time passed like a year for him. It was as if there was an hourglass of death that kept flowing, and when it ran out, there would be endless destruction. This time, there was no Bufang. No one could suppress Soul God with a dish anymore. He sighed. Tong Tian performed a sword incantation gesture again. A beam of light descended from the sky and smashed into the formation, causing ripples to appear on it. Continue to suppress him. I also have a sword, and I'm just waiting for you to come out. Tong Tian narrowed his eyes. He stared at the incomplete dish with a fierce look in his eyes. Bufang closed the restaurant's door. Then he gently closed it. Xiaobai and good Wushuang came over. Your Excellency, why are you closing so early today? Wushuang was a little puzzled. Xiaobai blinked his mechanical eyes. I have to go somewhere today. Pack up, and we'll go for a walk. Bufang said. Wushuang paused. Then he nodded. After a while, this guy ran into the room and carried his sword on his back. Except when he was helping with the business, he did not carry his sword. At other times, he would carry on his back. This was the professionalism of a sword immortal. Bufang did not say anything. Looking at Wushuang's sword, Bufang could not help but think of the god of cooking Set. The god of cooking Set and the gourmet array had melted and suppressed Soul God. Bufang did not have a good weapon now. Pack up, and we'll set out. Bufang said. Wushuang nodded, and so did Xiaobai. The current Whitey was becoming more and more intelligent, more and more human-like. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang took a step forward. The void twisted and turned into a huge spatial tunnel. He was the first to step into it. Wushuang and Whitey exchanged a glance and followed after Wuqi. Space swirled. When the three of them reappeared, they were over a vast sea. Where is this? The spiritual energy here is so thin. It's even thinner than that of planet immortality. Wushuang could not help but say, after sensing for a while, this is the place where I was born. Bufang said. Wushuang froze for a moment, and a slightly embarrassed expression appeared on his face. Sure enough, Your Excellency is extraordinary. You can cultivate to such a supreme realm in such a barren place. You're really a role model for all cultivators. Bufang glanced at Wushuang. After hundreds of years, your abilities have not improved, but your mouth has become much smoother. Wushuang laughed dryly. Bufang looked at the boundless sea and exhaled. His emotions were somewhat complicated when he returned to this place. Earth, in that battle. In the end, Soul God seemed to have pulled Earth out of the endless void. Now that he thought about it, his last body should be sealed on Earth. Bufang frowned, closed his eyes, and sensed the world with his mind. The wind blew, and the sea churned. The world was silent. He could not sense any fluctuation of Soul God's aura at all. What's going on? Did Soul God make a mistake? Bufang thought for a while. He took a step forward. Step by step, he ascended to the 9th heaven as if he were stepping on a flight of stairs. Bufang did not deliberately release his aura. However, the immortals on Penglai Island, Kunlun Immortal Mountain, and the other blessed caves all felt their hearts palpitate. They sat cross-legged in their cave abodes and looked up at the sky. They felt an extremely terrible aura floating between heaven and earth. The feeling made them unable to muster the slightest will to resist. Bufang ignored these immortals and deities. Instead, he entered the void. High up in the sky, amid the rolling clouds, he found a huge cave entrance. Xiaobai and Wushuang followed curiously. Bufang walked toward the mouth of the cave, took a step, and stepped into it. The entrance was pitch black. Sitting cross-legged in it were 3 stalwart figures. They seemed to sense Bufang's aura. The eyes of the 3 abruptly opened. Rumble. Behind Bufang, Wushuang's heart trembled as he felt a tremendous pressure bearing down on him. He was horrified. He could not believe that such a barren place was guarded by such an expert. In the distance, the man who opened his eyes and saw Bu Fong burst out laughing. Ha ha, you're finally back. Chapter 1826. You're finally back. It was a familiar tone. Bu Fong nodded. It was none other than Serene, the human emperor. He was the supreme human emperor who protected the ancestral planet with his life. In the cave, a bonfire was burning. Bu Fong sat down cross-legged beside it, with soul god suppressed. The three human emperors seemed to be much more relaxed. At least, they were not as depressed as they were the first time they came. Stop staring. I'm the only one left in the cave now. After Soul God was subdued, those two old geezers simply left behind a clone and transformed into the homeworld to roam the mortal realm. I wonder how many kids they'll bring with them when they return next time. Serene said with a hearty smile as he sat beside the bonfire. He looked curiously at Bu Fong. Bu Fong's return was not beyond his expectation. He had felt that Bu Fong was extraordinary, had a unique aptitude, and had a limitless future. Now it seemed that he was right. For example, he could not see through Bu Fong's cultivation base now. In the distance, Xiao Bai and Wu Shuang also came over. Hey, sit down and have a chat with me. Serene narrowed his eyes and smiled. Without the pressure brought by the soul demons, he became a little bored. With the soul demons no longer attacking Earth Barrier, he did not even have barbecue to eat. Wu Shuang was not used to Serene's enthusiasm. However, he also understood that this should be an old senior whose aura was much stronger than his. He was a chaotic saint-level expert. Bu Fong nodded. Then, he and Serene sat in front of the bonfire and began to chat. They were really just chatting. For example, what he had seen and heard during his 500 years as a mortal. After he came back to life, he talked about the insights he gained from opening a restaurant, the interesting things he did when he traveled the starry sky, and so on. For the first time, Wu Shuang realized that His Excellency could talk so much. Xiao Bai stared at the bonfire with his mechanical eyes in a daze. Sometimes, Serene would stroke his beard and laugh when he heard Bu Fong talk about things. Sometimes, he would nod his head with deep emotions. The years he had experienced were much longer than Bu Fong's. There were many things that he had a deeper understanding of than Bu Fong. Wu Shuang did not interrupt the conversation between the old man and the young man. Time passed. The sky darkened and then brightened. Bu Fong sat cross-legged in the cave and didn't say anything. The cave was very quiet. All that was left was the sound of sparks flying. After a long time, Serene let out a long sigh. It's rare for you to be able to persevere. It's really tiring to persevere on the same path. Serene, she said. This sigh was filled with emotion. As a human sovereign, he was supposed to be supreme, but he was willing to protect the ancestral planet with his life. He almost died when the soul demons invaded. All of this came from the determination in his heart. Now, he could only be a listener, listening to Bu Fong's story. He did not have the ability to help Bu Fong. They finished chatting. Bu Fong began to take out one ingredient after another from his storage space. These ingredients couldn't be considered ordinary. Their auras were as strong as those of a saint of the Great Path. Their auras were as weak as those of mortal ingredients. When Bu Fong cooked today, he would not pursue the pinnacle of ingredients. He only looked for ingredients that caught his eye, and as long as they caught his eye, he would use them to cook. Moreover, the combination of different ingredients could produce unique sparks. Perhaps this was the charm of cooking. What Bu Fong took out was the leg of a saint of the Great Path bird. It was a very large leg. Bu Fong took out a wooden frame and inserted it into the leg. Then, he placed it over the flame and began to roast it. I can finally eat your dishes again. I've been craving them for hundreds of years, but I haven't had a bite of meat yet. Now I can finally have my fill. Serene rubbed his hands with an expectant look on his face. Wu Shuang was a little speechless. This old senior is really straightforward. Bu Fong's face was expressionless. When it came to cooking, He was much more serious and serious. His cooking method was completely different from before. He no longer pursued fancy techniques. Instead, it was a kind of emotional integration. As the flame roasted the ingredients inch by inch, the color of the bird leg began to change. Grease flowed down from the top. When the oil dripped into the bonfire, the flames immediately flared up. Bufong slowly rotated the grill at an even speed, neither too fast nor too slow. A delicious aroma wafted out of it. It was the aroma of meat, the kind that would linger in one's heart as soon as it came out. It made people unable to extricate themselves and unable to control their emotions. "It smells so good," Swearin roared, his face flushed. Wushuang watched in shock. "Hey, I'm sorry. I was too excited. It's been a long time since I smelled something delicious," Swearin said with a smile. He rubbed his hands and wiped his beard, his saliva almost dripping down. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth curved upward. His movements remained the same. While the grill was roasting, he took out a blue and white porcelain bowl and handed it to Swearin, Wushuang, and Xiaobai. The meat became more golden, and a rich aroma wrapped around the bird leg like silk. With a shake of his hand, Bu Fong produced a dagger made of the origin of stars. He pressed his thumb against the back of the dagger and slowly cut it. A piece of roast meat was cut off, and the oil flowed. He threw it into Swearin's porcelain bowl. Impatiently, Swearin picked up the roast meat and stuffed it into his mouth, ignoring the heat. The moment he stuffed it into his mouth, Swearin froze. This roast meat, it was completely different from the roast meat he ate. What was that gurgling? It was an emotion, an indescribable emotion. Swearin's eyes were blurred as he chewed the roast meat in his mouth. He seemed to recall many scenes. At that time, he was still a young man walking on the ancestral planet. The whole ancestral planet was dark, and he, with the indomitable spirit of a young man, brought the first ray of light in the dark to the ancestral planet. As time went by, the young man's hair had turned white. Swearin sighed as he chewed the roast meat. Before he knew it, he had lived for so many years. He sniffled. Then he stuffed another piece of roast meat that Bufong handed to him in his mouth, wiped his greasy beard, and felt very happy. "My roasting skills are not as good as yours. If your roast meat is the second best under the starry sky, no one will dare to call themselves the best. I promise." Swearin wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Bufong's cooking skills had grown too fast. In the past, Bufong might have been a superb cook, but when it came to roasting meat, Swearin was only on par with him. But now, Swearin felt that he should be responsible for eating. Wushuang was also eating the roast meat. He felt the passage of time, and the hundreds of years he had spent with Bufong also filled him with emotion. Xiaobai held the roast meat, opened its mechanical mouth, and put it into it. Ding! Xiaobai's mechanical eyes suddenly lit up, and a pink flush seemed to appear on the white steel. Xiaobai clapped its hands mechanically, praising the delicious roast meat. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched slightly. He used a dagger to cut the meat on the bird's leg. Pieces of bird leg meat were cut off and placed on the plate. As the fire improved, the meat became softer and more fragrant. Swearin was very satisfied. The three of them ate happily. The joy of tasting delicious food was the purest joy of a person. After eating, Bufong took out some wine and poured a cup for Swearin. After eating the roast meat, they drank a small cup of wine. Swearin felt that there was nothing more beautiful in life than this. After eating and drinking, Bufong began to talk about the important topic. Of course, Soul God is sealed. He seems to be looking for something from the ancestral planet. Do you know what it is, Human Emperor? Bufong was puzzled. Swearin took a sip of wine and stroked his beard. Soul God needs a perfect fleshly body to return to heaven and earth. So what do you think he lacks? Swearin asked. One of Soul God's hands is in the chaotic universe. His lower body is in Void City. His head is upper body, and the other hand are in the primitive universe and the soul demon universe. What does he lack? Bufong was puzzled. He's lacking a heart. Swearin took another sip of wine. The imperial concubine was lying on the ground, her face reflected in the light of the fire. Lacking a heart. Soul God lacked a heart? Bu Fong was taken aback. Soul God walks the ruthless path. Does he need a heart? Bu Fong frowned. The heart is the source of power. Whether it's ruthless or emotional, it all depends on the existence of a heart. So, Soul God will never spare Earth. Swearin heaved a sigh. So what if he was ruthless? Only when he had a heart could he be ruthless. Without a heart, he would have no emotions, and he would never reach the peak. Ruthlessness was also a kind of emotion. Suerin's words plunged Bu Fong into deep thought. Clearly, he had not expected this. Where was Soul God's heart on Earth? Bu Fong did not know any of this. Perhaps he should go to Earth and look for it? Don't waste your energy. You can't find it, unless Soul God comes back to life and comes to look for it himself. Suerin seemed to have seen through everything. Bu Fong nodded. He stopped thinking about it. Wu Shuang and Xiao Bai were eating barbecued meat in a daze. They could not help with these problems. In the next few days, Bu Fong stayed in the cave. He cooked all kinds of delicious food. Suerin was so happy that he did not want Bu Fong to leave. However, he also knew that Bu Fong would definitely leave. He could not stay here forever. Finally, a month later, Bu Fong left with Xiao Bai and Wu Shuang. Standing at the entrance of the black hole with his hands clasped behind his back, Suerin sighed as he watched Bu Fong leave. He was going to start the days of not eating meat again. Time flew, and before he knew it, another few hundred years had passed. The atmosphere in the world had become more and more different. It was as if the soul demon universe, which had been sealed off, was in an uproar once again. The soul demons had reappeared in the world. The 7 sin great soul overlords who had been sacrificed by Soul God now had new candidates. One after another, soul demons appeared in the primitive universe, the chaotic universe, and outside Void City. There were even many small universes that were completely wiped out by the soul demons. Everything about the soul demons was born from the Soul God. Therefore, even though the Soul God had sacrificed 7 sin great soul overlords, the soul demons still followed his lead. Their goal was still to resurrect Soul God. Soul God was the soul of all soul demons. On this day, in Hangu Pass, Dish hovered in the universe. Now, there was only one bite left. The monstrous power of the great sin swirled around it, as if it had turned into a monstrous demon. Its terrible aura made the whole universe tremble. Buzz around the dish, numerous formations were activated by his aura, emitting a supreme pressure. A round black bead seemed to have formed around the dish. Black smoke swirled in the bead. Suddenly, it turned into an eye. The scarlet eye stared coldly at the outside world at Hangapass. Damn chef! Chapter 1827. His huge eyes were scarlet, cold and merciless, as if they were the coldest thing in the world. They turned and stared straight at Hangapass in the distance. However, his hatred for Hangapass was not even as great as the roar coming from his eyes. Damn chef! Heaven and earth shook. It was a rage that flowed from the depths of his soul. It was a deep hatred for the chef. Yes, how much he hated the chef. After thousands of years of scheming, he finally woke up, gathered his fleshly body, and made Soul God's supreme body reappear in the world. However, he had only been acting tough for a few seconds before he was suppressed by the chef with a dish. This made him furious. Soul Demon hated chefs from the bottom of his heart. He remembered that a long, long time ago, he was also suppressed by a chef with a dish. That time, he was suppressed for thousands of years and fell into a deep sleep. And now, he was suppressed by the chef again. Thousands of years of waiting had been exchanged for a reincarnation. F*CKU chef. Soul God's roar shook the universe and made the arrays around him rumble as if they were about to collapse at any moment. In Hangu Pass, many immortals and deities rose to their feet, their faces grave. Tong Tian flew on his sword and appeared in front of the terrible black smoke with just one step. He stared coldly at the black ball. 1,000 years was too short, and the day Soul God broke the seal was not far away. Tong Tian's face was unsightly. Buddha, Goddess Niwa, and Yuanshi Tianzuan also landed. The four almighty experts of the primitive universe hovered in midair and sighed. Soul God had gathered his fleshly body, and his power was comparable to the primitive universe's will of the great path. Even a perfected chaotic saint could not stop him. Once he broke the seal, the disaster he would bring would definitely destroy heaven and earth. If the primitive universe fell and soul demons were allowed to grow everywhere, the whole universe would become a land of death. Soul demons were parasites of the universe. His scarlet eyes turned and finally rested on Tong Tian. You can't suppress me for long. When I finish this mouthful, you will all die, he said coldly. On the dish, the last mouthful of food had a weak energy circulating. The pseudo-god of cooking dish, the stately painting, was, after all, not the real stately painting, so it was a little overwhelmed. Roar! It was like the roar of a demon. In the dish, a golden light flashed. The roars of dragons, tigers, sparrows, and turtles filled the air. He suppressed the evil power once more. However, everyone could feel that the dish's power had begun to fall into a disadvantageous position against Soul God. It couldn't be suppressed for much longer. 1,000 years have passed in the blink of an eye. This Soul God is about to come out again. Our arrays can't suppress him. The heavenly primogenitor sighed. We need to think of a way out. If the soul demons come out, we need to leave behind a wisp of primordial fire to pass on the future of the human race. The four primordial world big shot sighed. Sect leader Tong Tian's face darkened. He performed a sword incantation, and streams of sword energy rushed into the clouds and entered the array to strengthen it. The soul demon universe is restless again. New soul overlords of the 7 great sins have been born, and a new strongest soul overlord has appeared. The catastrophe of the past has descended once again. This time, it's really a crisis of life and death. Niwa said, they knew very well that once the soul god broke free, he would lead the army of soul demons and defeat the primitive universe's army in one fell swoop. There was no way to stop him. In fact, they could not stop him at all. Without Bufang's help, the soul demons' attributes were too disgusting. Their growth rate and strength, under the leadership of the soul god, would definitely make them the strongest army in the universe, unless they suppressed him with food. Although the heavenly primogenitor and the others did not quite understand why the soul god would be disgusted by food. However, perhaps this was the counterbalance of life. 1,000 years had passed. They had also trained many chefs, but it was far from enough. Although these chefs were very skilled, they were not enough to face the soul god. In fact, they were too weak to face the great soul overlords. Although they had used great means to raise the cultivation bases of these chefs to the level of chaotic saints, the price was huge, but that was all they could do. Those chefs were that man's apprentices. If it were not for that, they would not have found such an opportunity. Tong Tian heaved a sigh. Perhaps only the return of that man could truly suppress the soul god. What a pity! Send someone to inform the heaven gods of the chaotic universe and the dukes of Void City. We need to discuss a plan, Tong Tian said. His voice faded away. In the distant starry sky, a mighty immortal cupped his fist and flew away. He had gone to deliver the message. The return of the soul god was not just a catastrophe for the primitive universe. It was a catastrophe for both the chaotic universe and Void City. As for the experts of the other small universes, since they could not reach this level, they naturally ignored it. Rumble, in the distance, monstrous black smoke was sweeping and devouring the dish that was blooming with golden light. Tens of thousands of immortals hovered in midair, suppressing the array. Sect leader Tong Tian and the others flew away. Clearly, they had gone to discuss a plan. Bufang did not return a planet immortality. He walked in the starry sky with Xiao Bai and Wu Shuang, passing by many small worlds. Each of the 3,000 worlds had its own merits. There were too many things that Bufang could learn. For him, the mortal world was a way to settle and temper his state of mind. Wu Shuang followed behind Bufang. As they walked, he saw a lot. His sword became steadier and steadier, and many of its ostentatiousness disappeared, replaced by a kind of restrained emotion. His 7 emotions' sword became steadier. Perhaps all this was because Bu Fong was helping him. He had helped him deepen his foundation. Wu Shuang knew this, too, so every time he traveled in a small world, he worked hard to improve his cultivation base. The universe was boundless. There were countless stars. He could not walk all of them. However, he could feel the endless life in a limited number of stars. This was what Bu Fong wanted to comprehend. In fact, the emotions bred in every planet with life were the same, so it was not difficult to understand the similarities. What Bu Fong needed to do was sort out these similarities. He needed to comprehend the emotional path that belonged to him. Bu Fong's emotional path was not the 7 emotions and 6 desires, and it was not even a simple emotion. His emotion contained many emotions in the world. The emotions of people, objects, and all things in the world. It was very broad, so it was difficult to walk. Wu Shuang's aura became more and more unstable. Finally, one day on a planet, Wu Shuang sat there, his body covered with fallen leaves. His aura seemed to be so old that he was on the verge of death. In the distance, Xiao Bai and Bu Fong sat cross-legged by the campfire. Bu Fong was roasting a sweet potato. The simple sweet potato was roasted until it was char-black. It looked very ugly. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed with anticipation. Rumble, Wu Shuang's aura fluctuated. The earth began to shake violently. It was as if it was about to rush into the starry sky. Wu Shuang's aura kept soaring. Streaks of sword intent floated around his body. All the lives on this planet with life knelt on the ground, not daring to move. They felt a crushing pressure in the hierarchy of life. That kind of aura made their hearts palpitate. A saint had attained the Tao. They did not dare to offend him. All the experts knelt on the ground, feeling the sound of the great path flowing between heaven and earth. It was a sound that baptized the hierarchy of life. Many people sat cross-legged on the ground, breaking through as Wu Shuang broke through. As the ancient said, when a man attained the Tao, his chickens and dogs also ascended to heaven. In fact, it made sense. When a man attained the Tao, the lingering charm of the great path around him was enough to elevate many mortals to the level of immortals. The spiritual energy on the planet kept getting stronger, and everything in the world was flowing. The clouds were broken through by the turbulence. The sweet potatoes Bu Fong roasted were gradually ripening, giving off steam. He and Xiao Bai each took one. The last one was for Wu Shuang. When he was done with his breakthrough, he would let him take a bite of the hot sweet potato. He tore open the sweet potato. A ray of golden light burst out of it. Under the black surface was the golden sweet potato meat, which gave off a sweet aroma. The smell deeply tempted one's appetite. He took a bite. A burning sensation clung to his teeth, lips, and tongue. Bu Fong narrowed his eyes. He breathed a sigh of relief. Xiao Bai also carefully stuffed the sweet potato into his mouth. As the mechanical mouth closed and closed, it trembled like a human. Bu Fong glanced at Xiao Bai, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "You're just a lump of iron. Are you afraid of heat?" Rumble. A towering beam of sword light soared into the sky. Bu Fong ate while watching Wu Shuang's breakthrough. Wu Shuang's breakthrough was even more powerful than Tong Tian's breakthrough to the saint of the Great Path. Of course, Tong Tian was just a clone, so it was normal that his momentum was not strong enough. But now, Wu Shuang could cut through the sky with a sword. His aura kept rising like a stairway to heaven. At the level of Saint of the Great Path, he was strong enough to crush countless experts and even approach a chaotic saint. As for the level of a chaotic saint, Wu Shuang's foundation was still not strong enough. Or rather, he needed to create his own sword technique so that he could break through to the level of a chaotic saint. Although the 7 emotions sword path was strong, it was the limit for him to reach the peak of the saint of the Great Path. It was difficult to become a chaotic saint. But Bu Fong knew that if he gave Wu Shuang some time, he would definitely be able to step into the level of a chaotic saint. With his foundation and the level of his sword path, once he became a chaotic saint, he might be able to unleash the power of a perfected saint. Oh, in the primitive universe, Tong Tian seemed to sense something. He opened his Dharma eyes and looked through the void. He sensed a terrible sword intent erupting from an ordinary planet with lives. The corner of his mouth curved upward slightly. Wu Shuang has also become a saint. That's fast. This kind of sword intent reminds me of when I was young. After a long time, Tong Tian sighed with emotion again. Those who were related to that man were basically all geniuses. Unfortunately, nowadays, such a talented person would not be of much use to the universe. What Tong Tian needed was a formidable chef who could suppress Soul God. The sword light gradually dissipated. Wu Shuang's eyes flickered with sword intent. He took a step and returned to Bu Fang's side. Your Excellency, I did it. Wu Shuang's expression was very complicated. In just 1,000 years, he had grown from an ordinary swordsman to a saint of the sword path. He could not have imagined this in the past. Strictly speaking, he was a man who had died once. That death was the most important baptism of his soul. It was that death that allowed his realm to keep rising and reach his present level. He took the roasted sweet potato that Bu Fang threw to him. Wu Shuang caught it. It was so hot that his hands could not help but tremble. He kept blowing at it. It's so hot. He had become a saint of the sword path, but he could not even hold a roasted sweet potato. After eating the roasted sweet potatoes, Xiao Chun had already forgotten about the excitement of becoming a martial sage. His heart was filled with only the taste of the roasted sweet potatoes. It's so F***ing delicious. His fluctuating aura had stabilized, and it was even showing signs of improving further. This roasted sweet potato had helped him stabilize his cultivation base. As expected of His Excellency's roasted sweet potato. Are you done? Let's go back if you're done, Bu Fang said. He rose to his feet and patted his linen clothes. Wu Shuang nodded and carried the iron sword wrapped in rags on his back. Suddenly, Wu Shuang paused. He looked up at the starry sky in the distance. Bu Fang gave a soft cry of surprise. Outside this extremely ordinary planet with lives, a huge black hole emerged. Inside the black hole, one black meatball after another shot out of it and smashed toward the planet. A top-notch spirit overlord expert came out of it. His eyes were filled with greed. Chapter 1828. With the awakening of the soul god, the soul demons began to wreak havoc. It was a familiar feeling. They invaded the universe, devoured the lives in it, and multiplied themselves. This was the usual routine of the soul demons. This ordinary planet with lives was suspended in a small universe, and it happened to be targeted by a soul overlord this time. Once it was targeted, there would be a massacre. Perhaps because the soul god was still sealed, the soul demons kept a low profile. They did not choose to attack the three powerful universes. They dared not go to the chaotic universe, the primitive universe, or the universe where Void City was. After all, those three universes were guarded by perfected experts. If they went there and were discovered, they would die. Therefore, they specifically chose some remote, small universes to attack. They devoured small universes, slaughtered the living beings in them, and turned them into energy to develop themselves. Before this soul overlord had already slaughtered dozens of planets with lives. Hee, I smell something delicious. The soul overlord sneered. Behind him, numbered soul demons emerged one after another. One numbered soul demon after another emerged, while ordinary soul demons scrambled to fly toward the star. Although ordinary living beings could not increase their cultivation base too much, no matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. As long as they ate enough, their cultivation base would naturally improve. Darkness enveloped the whole planet, causing heaven and earth to tremble in fear. The will of the great path on this planet was powerless in the face of this darkness. Boom, boom, boom. Terrifying soul demons smashed into the ground like meteors, leaving potholes in the ground. They roared and hissed. In this remote area, they did not have to worry about death. so they could unleash their savagery at will. Bufang and Wushuang were about to leave the planet when Wushuang and Bufang arrived. They did not expect such an accident to happen. Looking at the pitch-black hole in the sky, Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth. These soul demons might be a little stupid. Didn't they sense your sword energy? Bufang said to Wushuang. Soul demons. Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. He knew that His Excellency had destroyed his own cultivation base to seal the soul god's leader. He did not expect that the soul demons would appear again and begin to harm the world. He could not tolerate this. Let's go and have a look. Soul Overlord meat tastes good. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched, and he somehow missed the Soul Overlord meat. Back then, he was getting old, and he was starting to reminisce about the past. Bufang shook his head, put his hands behind his back, and soared into the sky with Xiao Bai and Wushuang. Wushuang's divine sense spread out and covered the whole planet in an instant. This time, he had witnessed the horror of the soul demons. Those cruel soul demons were simply the most vicious invaders. Wherever they passed, not even a blade of grass grew. All mortals were devoured. Even 3-year-old babies were not spared. As Wushuang watched, his eyes gradually became angry and cold. Bufang was also expressionless. These damned beasts, Wushuang said coldly. Soul demons feed on living beings and feed on them. They are fearless of the heavenly Tao. This is indeed a heinous crime. Bufang's face was cold. He had not seen the soul demons for 1,000 years, and they were as hateful as ever. The mortals on the planet were terrified. They hugged each other and watched the catastrophe with horror on their faces. In midair, the Soul Overlord was laughing excitedly. This was the feeling. The more frightened they were, the more delicious humans tasted. Fear was the best seasoning. Rumble. Wushuang finally could not stand it anymore. The iron sword on his back suddenly shook and broke the old rags wrapped around it. Then he gripped the ancient black sword in his hand. The sound of the sword rang through the sky. Buzzed the sword soared into the sky. Wushuang's face was cold as he flicked the sword with his finger. Ding! A crisp sound rang out. In an instant, it enveloped the whole world. Then, one beam of sword energy after another fell from the sky and flew across the entire planet. Oh! The soul demons who were wreaking havoc suddenly froze. Then, their scarlet eyes widened as they found that their bodies had been pierced by a beam of sword energy and exploded. The power of the sword energy was truly terrifying. One soul demon after another exploded into pieces. They could not resist it at all. The power of the sword energy filled them with despair. The mortals shrieked in terror. But soon, they found that the sword energy could not hurt them, and they burst into tears of joy. Immortals are here to save us. These damned demons. Wushuang's face was cold. With just one sword strike, he slaughtered all the soul demons on the planet. With just one sword strike, he had slaughtered all the soul demons on the planet. His strength had already grown to an extremely terrifying level. Even a numbered soul demon could not stop one beam of sword energy from him. If he could block one beam, he would be killed by 2 beams of sword energy. All the soul demons on the planet were wiped out. Wushuang held the sword in one hand and walked step by step toward the huge black hole. His target was the laughing Soul Overlord. The Soul Overlord also noticed Wushuang. He roared. A cultivator at the level of a saint of the Great Path? Not only was the Soul Overlord not afraid, but there was even a look of excitement in his eyes. After devouring a saint of the Great Path, his strength could even break through to the level of a top Soul Overlord. Roar! His roar resounded through heaven and earth. One soul demon after another sped out of the black hole behind him. They turned into a black torrent that blotted out the sky and rushed toward Wushuang. Wushuang's face was cold. He shook his hand. The iron sword rumbled. Then he swung it out. A beam of sword energy that blotted out the sky stretched across the starry sky. Countless soul demons were instantly wiped out by the sword. The Soul Overlord roared and collided with Wushuang's sword energy. However, He was sent flying, and the scales on his body were shattered. The fighting prowess of a saint of the sword path was so terrifying. You want to leave? Wu Shuang's eyes turned cold as he looked at the soul overlord, who was about to jump into the black hole. He took a step forward. The black iron sword gathered into a circle around him. Countless beams of sword energy swirled around the circle and shot out. They moved extremely fast, whistling through the air and causing the sky to crack and shatter. The soul overlord could not resist at all. When he tried to block the attack, his arms were chopped to pieces. Damn it! Why is there such a human sword immortal on this ordinary planet? The soul overlord roared. He wanted to escape into the black hole. Wu Shuang's killing intent surged, and he was fearless. He displayed the 7 emotions sword path and one beam of sword energy after another cut through the void. He flew straight toward the black hole. As for himself, he also stepped forward and charged into the black hole. You're courting death. How dare you step into the soul demon black hole? The soul overlord fled into the black hole. His body was chopped to pieces, leaving only his true form to flee. However, he did not expect that Wu Shuang would dare to chase after him. The soul demon black hole was connected to the soul demon universe. Is this human an idiot? Rumble. As soon as Wu Shuang stepped into the black hole, he slashed out with his sword. The soul overlord's body was chopped to pieces. However, he also felt that something was wrong, and he frowned slightly. The surrounding darkness was pressing down on him from all directions. It was as if he was stuck in a swamp. It was a very uncomfortable feeling. But why should he be afraid? As a saint of the sword path, he should move forward with an indomitable will. Everything should be broken with a sword. On the planet, Bu Fong clasped his hands behind his back and looked up at the same time as Xiao Bai. Looking at Wu Shuang, who had stepped into the black hole, the corner of his mouth twitched. That boy is really not afraid of death. He shook his head. Although Wu Shuang's sword path had become a saint, he was just a saint of the great path. Any great soul overlord could probably kill him. It was not easy to become a soul god in the soul demon universe, and it was not easy to become a perfected soul god. However, it was definitely very easy to become a great soul overlord. The sinful power of the soul demon universe was bound to give birth to a great soul overlord. Xiao Bai, let's go and clean up the mess for Wu Shuang. At the same time, we can find some soul overlord ingredients. It's been a long time since I've had a soul overlord cook. I wonder if his skills are rusty, Bu Fong said lightly. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed with a golden light. Rumble. The pressure in the black hole grew stronger and stronger. Wu Shuang focused his eyes. He took a step forward. Then, he charged out of the black hole and rushed into the starry sky. This part of the starry sky was deathly silent. Looking around, there were shattered stars and ruins everywhere. Black meatballs were clinging to them. The air was filled with the sinful power that disgusted him to the extreme. In the void, he could not extract any dermic powers. Damn it, where am I? Wu Shuang's face flickered. Because His Excellency was here, he was unscrupulous. However, it seemed that he had gone too far in showing off. In the distance, the soul demon's true form, which had been cut into pieces, was hovering in midair. Reckless human, do you know where you are? The soul overlord hovered in the starry sky. Soon, the balls of flesh attached to the stars exploded and turned into energy that swept towards his body, forming a physical body. The soul overlord had returned to his original appearance. Wu Shuang's heart skipped a beat. Could it be Rumble? In the distance, the auras of one soul overlord after another erupted. These soul overlords were the top soul overlords who had become soul overlords in other universes and returned to the soul demon universe. At this moment, they were piling up one by one. Wu Shuang felt great pressure. He was not afraid of one soul overlord, 2 soul overlords, 3 soul overlords, and 4 soul overlords. However, if there were too many of them, he might be killed. Buzz, the soul overlords fixed their cold eyes on him. Wu Shuang's heart skipped a beat. But what's there to be afraid of? Although he cultivated the 7 emotions sword path as a sword immortal, He naturally had an indomitable spirit. With a sword in hand, the world bows to me. Wu Shuang laughed heroically. Wu Shuang took a step forward and slashed his sword forward. His magic power boiled, and countless streams of sword energy gathered. Then, a huge sword energy that stretched across the void slashed out. This gigantic sword chi was formed by the convergence of countless smaller sword chi, and it contained an extremely terrifying killing power. This kind of power was unparalleled. The few soul overlords were forced back by his sword. He's so strong. The soul overlords were not afraid. Instead, they looked pleasantly surprised. In the soul demon universe, they were fearless. But this human sword immortal was alone. Could he really turn the world upside down? Unless that terrible chef from 1,000 years ago came. Otherwise, what were they afraid of? In the soul demon universe, there was a huge black planet floating in the sky. Flowing over it was the extremely terrible power of sin. The buildings on the planet were made of sharp, hideous black stones, and they rose into the sky one after another. The planet's surface was covered with black meatballs, each of which seemed to be breathing in and out. The power of sin was pouring out of them. Rumble. A supreme existence opened his eyes. His huge eyeballs rolled. Then, Wu Shuang's figure was reflected in them. Courting death, human, how dare you attack the soul demon universe? Die. Rumble. The planet trembled as the great soul overlord soared into the sky. Wu Shuang sensed the aura. His expression flickered. Damn it, he's so strong. He sucked in a cold breath. He had a bad feeling. He turned and wanted to go back through the black hole. However, the black hole began to slowly heal. Oh, Wu Shuang's expression changed. If he was really left here when his magic power recovered, he would probably die. Suddenly, Wu Shuang paused. Just as the black hole was about to heal, two figures emerged from it. Bu Feng and Xiao Bai walked slowly out. Your Excellency. Wu Shuang's eyes lit up in surprise. The next moment, he felt full of confidence. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.